Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be a great late night conversation, like we always do on this channel. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Should be a very good conversation that we have tonight. So, yeah, let's go.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just it's a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to see you all here tonight. We're going to have yet another one of our great late night conversations to discuss all the important things we discuss. I was just in Portland, got back last night, and I had a great movie screening out there in Portland. Shout out to all the people that I met from our community out there. Shout out to Miles. Shout out to Chris and Rose. Shout out to Terry. Oh my goodness, I don't want to forget anybody. Shout out to Alex. Shout out to Elizabeth. Shout out to Michael and Catherine. And oh my goodness, I'm gonna forget more people. I mean, oh wow. Shout out to so many great people. Shout out to Carl Payne. Carl Payne, he's from that area. Shout out to everyone at the John Reed Center. Oh man, I'm gonna forget somebody if I keep shouting out, but it was a great little film screening we had out there. We originally were going to have it at the Mount Hood Community College. We ended up having it at another space nearby. It was really, really great. It was really, really great to see everybody. And one of the main reasons I was out there for that screening was to set the stage for what's coming up, because December 2nd, we are going to have a mass anti-imperialist rally to stop the march toward World War III. We are going to have an anti-imperialist rally in Portland, Oregon. And I was out there to talk to the John Reed Center about the buses that are going to bring people into town. That was great. And I was out there to, talk to people about building it locally. And wow, it was really, really a great opportunity to engage with people about what's coming up. Our mass anti-imperialist rally that will feature libertarians and People's Party and Party of Communists. Jyoti Brar from the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, is coming to town. It was really, really great. It was really, really great. And it was really, really great to see everybody there and to just kind of see our community and engage with our community. So many great people that we work with. Wow. Who else do I need to shout out, right? Marissa, shout out to Marissa. It was great to see her there. Oh man, it was really, really, really great. It was really, really, really great. And I am looking forward to it. Now, the way we do things on these streams, as usual, is we do the opening remarks, which is when I just talk about whatever it is I'm planning to talk about. I have some prepared opening remarks. Then from there, we do a roll call where we find out who is watching on the other side of the camera. Right now, we're on the Rumble, we're on the Rockfin, and we're on the YouTube. And we do a roll call on all platforms to see who's watching. And then on top of that, then for the remainder of the night, we then answer people's super chat questions. And so if you got something you want me to talk about, I will very happily talk about answering your question. So I see there's one super chat that's come in already. And I see that there's a few people on the Rumble. There's a few people on Rockfin. So if you got something you want me to talk about, send me a super chat question. People that first super chat's already on the list. And with no real further ado, I will jump into my opening remarks for tonight. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I will say one thing I refuse to be is a victim of algorithmic manipulation. I refuse to be that, right? And it's pretty clear. Not going to say much more about it, but it's pretty clear that the YouTube and Twitter and other algorithms are trying to manipulate me to carry out certain behaviors. I ain't going to do it. I'm going to talk about whatever I goddamn want to. I'm going to talk about what is necessary to build the Center for Political Innovation and to build our organization. They can incentivize me all they want. They can boost certain videos and boost certain comments and all of that. I'm going to talk about what it is that I want to talk about. And I'm not going to talk about what the social media algorithms want to manipulate me into talking about. So there you go. Another quick announcement before I start my opening remarks. My new book, A Letter to Bob Avakian, is selling. A number of people have bought it already. This is my critique, but also assessment in a pretty balanced way of the achievements of the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, Bob Avakian. I got a few more interviews about it lined up. But if you want to give it a read, go buy it on Amazon. And on top of that, if you liked it, go write a review for Amazon. That would be great. Or write a review on Goodreads. The book is doing pretty well. People are reading it. I've gotten good feedback. So there you go. There you go. All right, I'm going to start my opening remarks. Folks. And I'll be writing the super chats or the Rumble rants or the Rockfin tips down, right? And if you got something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, by all means, do it. We are engaged in a project to build an anti-imperialist movement in the United States of America. And really, what we are trying to do, to some extent, is to rebuild what was lost at the end of the Second World War, what was taken from the American working class at the end of the Second World War, to reconstruct an axis within U.S. society that once existed, but to build it in the context of the current moment. We're not trying to build, once again, what was there before. We are trying to build something that would play a similar role to what was there before and could possibly lead us out of the disaster and the nightmare that's unfolding before us and lead us towards socialism. During the 1930s, especially the late 1930s, there was an organization in the United States that represented the working class and the global anti-imperialist movement. And that organization was the Communist Party. The Communist Party had tens of thousands of members. It organized and was at the center of labor unions, unemployment councils, working class organizations, women's organizations, writers' organizations, black organizations, anti-fascist organizations, legal organizations, artist associations, artistic communities. It was the center of a big layer of U.S. society that was aligned with the Soviet Union and with the people of the world in their struggle against imperialism, and was aligned with the working class of the United States and the world in the struggle to defeat imperialism. Lenin taught us that imperialism is capitalism in its monopoly stage, There's the rule of the world by monopolistic associations, trusts, cartels, and syndicates that hold on to their power by holding back economic development. And that the battle for socialism in our time is the battle against imperialism. It is the struggle to break chunks of this world free from the imperialist system, and it is the struggle to destroy the imperialist system at its center and rebuild the world on the basis of international friendship and cooperation. That is what the struggle for socialism is in our time. And it was Lenin who had the understanding that capitalism had moved into its monopoly stage. It was Lenin who understood that in such a time, the national liberation struggles of colonized peoples in Africa and Asia and Latin America, these struggles were progressive, even if they were fought on a nationalist basis, because they were struggling to defeat imperialism and break their country out of imperialism. And that the working class and the communists would be at the center of an anti-imperialist united front. And in the struggle to defeat the imperialists, the working class would lead, and socialism would come into existence as the expression of the struggle against imperialism. That is the Leninist understanding. And it was that understanding that created the Russian Revolution. And it was that understanding that created the Chinese Revolution and the Cuban Revolution, the Korean Revolution. It's that understanding that laid the basis for the block of countries around the world that have broken out of imperialism in our time. And it was this understanding that guided the actions of the Communist Party of the United States. The Communist Party of the United States built labor unions, built the United Auto Workers, the UAW. Those workers are on strike. Well, it was the Communist Party that built the UAW. Go and read Communists and the Auto Workers Unions. Very good book that was written by Roger Kieran. I recommend it, about how long before the United Auto Workers was created, the Communist Party was attempting to unionize the auto workers, and they built the UAW and they fought for their position until they were kicked out of it during the McCarthy period. The Great Flint Sit-Down Strike, 1937, was very much the work of the Communist Party. The Communist Party built the steel workers unions. The Communist Party organized the unemployment councils that rioted and demanded jobs for the unemployed, forced Roosevelt to create the Works Progress Administration. The Communist Party is responsible for Social Security. It's responsible for the Wagner Act that legalized labor unions. It's responsible for the Fair Labor Standards Act and the minimum wage. It's responsible for many of the great victories and economic securities working people in this country enjoy. Food stamps. Food stamps were largely a project of Henry Wallace, who was the Secretary of Agriculture and eventually became Vice President under Roosevelt. The Communist Party entered a strategic alliance with Roosevelt because they saw fascism and the Nazis in Germany and the Italian fascists and the Japanese fascists as the main danger. And so they entered a strategic alliance with Roosevelt. They had his back against attempted coups. And the Communist Party, that represented millions of people in America, but had a core of 80, 90,000 members, had its conventions in Madison Square Garden in New York City. They, in their essence, represented the American working class, and they represented the struggle against imperialism. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't have any problems. They certainly had big problems. And during the Second World War, the Communist Party of the United States made a number of great mistakes. Because the Soviet Union was in an alliance with the United States against Hitler, the orientation of the communists was to support the war effort to defeat the Nazis. And that was correct, but they went over the top with it. They supported Japanese internment. That was wrong. They celebrated the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was wrong. They dropped their support for black nationalism. And that was wrong. They dissolved. They became the Communist Political Association, 1942, and stopped being a party. That was wrong. Earl Browder was the leader of the Communist Party during the Second World War, and he took the support for the United States and the U.S. war effort a little bit over the top. And after the Second World War, there was an uprising within the Communist Party against Earl Browder, against Browderism. And William Z. Foster, the leader of the Steelworkers Union, the voice of American communism during the 1930s, he became the figure that rallied the Communist Party membership to repudiate Earl Browder. The Communist Party was refounded with an emergency convention. And Earl Browder, who had overseen the dissolving of the Communist Party, who had overseen the Communist Party supporting the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who'd overseen the Communist Party dropping its support for black liberation in the Black Belt South, Earl Browder was repudiated. And as the Second World War came to its conclusion, the Communist Party was a massive organization with lots of support, and it underwent a kind of a rectification campaign, working against Browderism and the reformism and some of the pro-imperialist politics that had slipped in during the war, and reestablishing its Marxist-Leninist foundations. 1945, William Z. Foster spoke against revisionism and the revisionism of Earl Browder. Mao congratulated William Z. Foster and the Communist Party on defeating the revisionism of Earl Browder. And the Communist Party, reestablished in 1945, said that U.S. imperialism, the system of monopoly capitalism centered around the United States and Wall Street and London, that was the main danger to the people of the world. And the Communist Party's focus was on building an anti-monopoly coalition. William Z. Foster, leader of the Communist Party. I think I have the book up here. Yes, I do. Got to get the book off the shelf here. William Z. Foster. He wrote this beautiful book, The Twilight of World Capitalism. The lessons of epochal changes we have transformed the world in Foster's life, the decline of capitalism and the rise of socialism. And in this book, he lays out, and I quote this book many times in my writing because it's a brilliant book, that the Communist Party of the United States, as the Cold War was beginning, they understood that their purpose was to build an anti-monopoly coalition and to fight for an anti-monopoly government in America. An anti-monopoly government. A coalition of small business owners, a coalition of farmers, labor unions, workers, the black community, mobilizing and coming together against the big monopolies and their war drive and their drive for fascism, building an anti-monopoly coalition. And the Communist Party didn't simply write about doing this. 1948, Henry Wallace, who had been vice president under Roosevelt, Henry Wallace ran for president against Harry Truman because Harry Truman was a warmonger and an anti-communist. Henry Wallace split with the Democratic Party, and he started the Progressive Party and ran against Harry Truman in the national election. Henry Wallace ran for president, and the Communist Party, They were the main force behind the Henry Wallace presidential campaign. Henry Wallace was not a communist, but he ran on a platform of continuing the Roosevelt-era alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union, peace with the Soviet Union, protecting the rights of labor unions, support for black people against Jim Crow segregation and advancing the rights of black people, and against McCarthyism and the witch hunt. And Henry Wallace ran for president against the Democratic Party. And many black people, not in the South where they couldn't vote, but in the urban centers in New York City, in Chicago, in Pittsburgh, in Minneapolis, and San Francisco, many black people outside of the South were supportive of Henry Wallace because they saw the Democrats as the party of the Jim Crow South, and Henry Wallace was supportive of civil rights. And as the Democrats saw that they might be losing votes to Henry Wallace because many black ministers and black congregations were wanting to vote for Henry Wallace against Truman, Harry Truman took a dramatic move, and he integrated the U.S. armed forces. During World War II, they'd had black divisions of the Army and white divisions of the Army. Harry Truman integrated the U.S. armed forces, ended racial segregation in the U.S. military. And then the Democrats of the South broke with Harry Truman, and they formed the National States' Rights Party, which was the Ku Klux Klan, white supremacist party, and they split, and they ran against Harry Truman. The Democrat vote was split three ways in the 1948 presidential election. Harry Truman was running for re-election as a Democrat, but the Roosevelt Democrats, who wanted to continue being friendly with the Communist Party, friendly with the Soviet Union, they voted for Henry Wallace. And the racist Democrats, who opposed integrating the U.S. military, who thought Truman wasn't doing enough to support segregation, they formed the National States' Rights Party. There's a famous photo, and I think I'll put it on the stream. I don't know if you've ever seen this. It's a very, very famous photo. I'm going to put it on the screen because it shows you. This is how important the Communist Party was. Do not underestimate. The Communist Party of the United States was a very, very important organization. Very, very important organization. This is how important they were. All right? This is a very famous photo. That's Harry Truman, after he won the election, holding up the newspaper that had been published ahead of time and got it wrong. And why did the newspaper get it wrong? Why did all the polls show that Dewey, the Republican, would win the election and not Harry Truman? Because of the Communist Party. Because the Communist Party had formed the Progressive Party and split the Democratic vote, and because Harry Truman had reacted to that by moving against segregation, and the Democrat vote had been split once again, and there was no way that the Democrats could have actually won the 1948 election. The Republicans were all voting Republican, and the Democrat vote was split three ways. The only way that this could have happened was because there was massive voter fraud, and there was massive voter fraud. The urban centers of the United States were notoriously corrupt, and in Chicago and Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, in many places, the votes for Henry Wallace and Strom Thurmond were being thrown in the garbage, and it shows you that there's always been election fraud in the United States. There's election fraud in most countries. Now, that doesn't mean the results of the election are impure, but there is often foul play in elections. You can't deny that. People get arrested on every election day in New York City for voting under a false ID or voting in someone else's place. These things do happen. And there's no way that Truman could have won this election in 1948. There's no way he could have won it. That was because of the Communist Party, because they understood that their job was to build an anti-monopoly coalition, and they did it, and they had such an impact. But McCarthyism was happening at this time. Communists were being thrown in prison. The National Board of the Communist Party was thrown in prison. Around the country, hundreds of communists were imprisoned for being members of the Communist Party. The Communist Party was hounded by the FBI. It was forced to function as a somewhat underground, clandestine organization. But despite that, they still did amazing things. They organized the Civil Rights Congress. Read about the Civil Rights Congress. This was an organization that fought for the rights of black people. It provided lawyers for black people that were facing the death penalty in the Jim Crow South. Read about the Civil Rights Congress. It was declared by the U.S. Department of Justice to be a subversive organization. They actually outlawed paying bail money from the Civil Rights Congress. The Civil Rights Congress was not permitted to pay bail money, but you read about the Civil Rights Congress. This was all run by the Communist Party. William L. Patterson, Paul Robeson, Henry Winston, Claudia Jones, they ran the Civil Rights Congress, and they were all Communist Party members. And it did amazing work to fight for the rights of black people. Martin Luther King had not started at this point. The Montgomery bus boycott didn't happen until 1954. This was in 1949, 1951. You can also read about We Charge Genocide. You know about We Charge Genocide? Oh, this was a petition that was taken to the United Nations. W.E.B. Du Bois and William L. Patterson and a number of black communists wrote a document compiling information about the oppression of black people in America. And they took it to the United Nations, and the Soviet Union gave them a platform to condemn the U.S. government for genocide against black people. We charge genocide. All right, this is as the Communist Party was illegal, as its members were being thrown in prison. They still did utterly amazing things to change the political conversation in the United States. Now, they were functioning as an illegal underground organization. Their newspapers were banned from the mail. Their members were locked up and serving 5-6-year sentences just for being communists. Not an easy time to do the kind of work that they did. Not an easy time to be doing the kind of work that they did, but they did it. Now, we know what happened later. Eventually, McCarthyism in America started to ebb. Joe McCarthy drank himself to death. Stalin died. The Rosenbergs got the death penalty, and Europe condemned the execution of the Rosenbergs. And it started to appear that McCarthyism was starting to ebb. In 1956, Khrushchev gave his secret speech condemning Stalin. And in the aftermath of Khrushchev giving his secret speech condemning Stalin, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in its famous Yates versus the United States ruling that it was legal for the Communist Party to operate as long as they did not advocate the violent overthrow of the government. So in 1957, the Communist Party became legalized once again. But it was very clear that when the Communist Party was legalized after Khrushchev's horrendous speech condemning Stalin, it was legalized as a favor to the Soviet Union because the United States was hoping they could negotiate with Khrushchev and that Khrushchev would grant concessions in a way that Stalin wouldn't. And then on top of that, the Communist Party being legal in the United States would be something the U.S. could point to. They could say, you don't have a capitalist party in the Soviet Union, but we legalized the Communist Party. We're an open, free country here. Sure, we put all the communists in jail. Sure, we viciously cracked down on the Communist Party during McCarthyism, but now it's legal. When the Communist Party resurfaced, they announced at that point that they were considering dropping Marxism-Leninism from their ideology. They were considering a merger with the Socialist Party of America. They had an event in Madison Square Garden to announce that they were forming as an organization, that they were public once again. And they famously, there was a debate between Eugene Dennis, who was the leader of the Communist Party, and Norman Thomas, who was the leader of the Socialist Party. And at that debate, Norman Thomas ended his closing statement by saying, "I don't think there's any way the Socialist Party can cooperate with the Communist Party at this time." And then Eugene Dennis got up for his closing remarks and said, "I'm so happy that Norman Thomas used the phrase, at this time, because that means someday we can cooperate." And then in 1958, the Communist Party had its national convention. And in 1958, the Communist Party died. And thank you, David. Thank you, David. We love you, David Fox. Great member of our community. The Communist Party basically died. All those who were defending Stalin and defending Stalin from Khrushchev, and they were kicked out. And all those who wanted to maintain the black belt position of supporting black people as an oppressed nation within U.S. borders, they were kicked out. And shortly after that convention, a faction that was pro-imperialist and supported U.S. imperialism and had been publishing anti-communist U.S. foreign policy propaganda about Hungary and other countries, led by John Gates, they were kicked out. And after the 1958 convention of the Communist Party, at that point, the Communist Party was an irrelevant organization. It was never more than 2,000 members. And it was very closely monitored and controlled by the FBI. Its headquarters had been basically set up by the FBI. The FBI told them where to go, what to do. We now know that one of the members of the national board was, it's famous Operation Solo. You can read about it, how the national board of the Communist Party, there was a guy who was the head of the, Morris Childs was his name, who got the Presidential Medal of Freedom for managing the Communist Party for the FBI, for smuggling money in from the Soviet Union. Read about Morris Childs, the FBI informant who was on the national board and was directing the Communist Party and overseeing its activities. The Communist Party basically died in 1958. It stopped being a revolutionary organization that was building an anti-imperialist united front. It was kind of a symbolic organization that existed as a gesture to the Soviet Union. And it was not revolutionary in its activities, and it was controlled by the FBI. And you can read all about that. And they've been pretty much irrelevant since then. However, there have been many people who wanted to continue its mission of building an anti-monopoly coalition, of defeating U.S. imperialism. You had the Progressive Labor Movement, or the Progressive Labor Party, PLP. That was a split from the Communist Party in the early 60s. They aligned themselves with China. They tried to rebuild a more radical version of the Communist Party. They called themselves the PLP, the Progressive Labor Party. They were formed. They were involved in protesting the Vietnam War and protesting for civil rights. The PLP. You had a group of students that had been part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, led by Stokely Carmichael, who formed the RAM, the Revolutionary Action Movement, which was an underground black nationalist communist organization that had been established. And eventually it was out of the RAM that we got the Black Panthers. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale had been members of the RAM, and they decided to go and do the Black Panther Party for self-defense. And as the Black Panther Party emerged, as the crisis of the 1960s escalated, you had an organization in the United States called Students for a Democratic Society, SDS. And SDS had started out as kind of a liberal activist group. But as the 1960s got going, it became more and more radical. And many of the young people in Students for a Democratic Society called themselves communists. They used to march through the streets of New York City and other cities waving the flag of the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. And they would chant, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is going to win. Ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF, or the National Liberation Front, is going to win. They would chant, one side's right, one side's wrong, victory to the Viet Cong. And there were a number of young people who were inspired by the protests against the Vietnam War and were inspired by the Black Liberation Movement. They were interested in forming a new communist party. And in most parts of the country, around universities and in kind of radical strongholds, there would be a layer of young middle-class white people who supported the Black Panthers and supported the Vietnamese and lived together. They usually lived together as college students and studied Marxist, Leninist, communist theory. And most of them were members of Students for a Democratic Society to some degree or other. Now, the Progressive Labor Party was one big faction in SDS, and the other faction was called the Revolutionary Youth Movement. The Progressive Labor Party declared that Black nationalism was inherently reactionary and denounced the Black Panthers. They also declared that the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, because they negotiated with the United States, were sellouts, and they denounced the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, and they wanted young people to join, and get jobs in factories and join something called the Workers' Student Alliance. That was the Progressive Labor Party. They were probably the majority of young SDS radicals were in the Workers' Student Alliance, and they were part of, aligned with the Progressive Labor Party. But then you had this other faction, the Revolutionary Youth Movement, and it was the people that were probably the celebrities, the more famous people in Students for a Democratic Society: Bernardine Dohrn, Bill Ayers, Mark Rudd. And they supported the Black Panthers, and they supported the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. And there was a split at the 1969 SDS National Convention. The two groups fought each other. There was, violence between the two organizations. They both split the organization. Now, the Revolutionary Youth Movement, the wing of SDS that supported the Black Panthers, was very broad. And there were many young people in it who supported the Black Panthers and supported the Vietnamese and were vaguely affiliated with it. But almost immediately, the leaders of the Revolutionary Youth Movement, and they had gotten the nickname the Weathermen because they had written a manifesto called "You Don't Need a Weatherman to Know Which Way the Wind Blows," which is I got you, Nicholas, which is a line from a Bob Dylan song. Because of that, they had this name, and almost immediately they had started at that point to call for left adventurist street fighting, and to argue that the hippie counterculture laid the basis for recruitment among white youth. They argued that hippies and drug users, the young people that were listening to rock music and using drugs, they were the basis for recruiting young white people to support the Black Panthers and support communism internationally. And they also believed that then they needed to mobilize these young people to go out into the streets and engage in property destruction, break things, and engage in fighting with the police, breaking windows, stuff like that. Well, the majority of people within the Revolutionary Youth Movement didn't think that was correct. They understood that the hippies, the counterculture, were a minority, that most white people didn't support them. And so you had a grouping called Revolutionary Youth Movement 2, RIM 2, that was formed that denounced the grouping that you called the Weathermen or the Weather People. The Weather People started launching these very provocative street fighting actions, the Days of Rage in Chicago. They had the Flint War Council in Flint, Michigan. And ultimately, they went underground and launched a series of bombing campaigns. And they started setting off bombs, and were an underground organization. However, the bulk of the people that supported the Black Panthers and supported the Vietnamese National Liberation Front were called Revolutionary Youth Movement 2. And Revolutionary Youth Movement 2, there was an understanding among them that it was necessary to build a communist party, a new communist party. And so throughout the 1970s, you had a current called the New Communist Movement. And it was a number of different parties that were formed: the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Communist Labor Party, the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist, the Communist Workers' Party, that were an attempt to form a new communist party that would be aligned with China, and would build an anti-monopoly coalition in the United States and defeat imperialism. And the New Communist Movement, it was an attempt to rebuild what the Communist Party USA had been before it was smashed. That was the idea. And these folks made a lot of sacrifices, and they did a lot of hard work, but they didn't have very many successes because the USA still had a very strong economy. There was still a very prosperous and right-wing middle class in the United States. And throughout the 1970s, these folks got jobs in factories, and they sold communist newspapers to their coworkers, and they tried to build a communist party, and they didn't have much success. And, there were some places they had modest success. In Detroit, they had a lot of influence among Black auto workers. There was a communist faction of the United Auto Workers that was formed. It was called DRUM, the Dodge Revolutionary Union Movement. It eventually became the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. They got a communist judge elected to Detroit, in Detroit, to the bench, and he had Mao's little red book on his bench as the judge. And on top of that, you had various parts of the country where city council seats were headed by communists, and it was in the culture. And if you watch movies from this time period, you can see that. Watch the movie Network, for example, right? And it shows you that communist groups, Maoist communist groups, were in the culture. Watch the movie Car Wash, which was made during these years. You also see the same thing. Maoist communist groups were in the culture. They tried, but the white working class largely didn't want to hear it. The economy was still very strong. And then there was a big economic downturn at the end of the 1970s. And in this economic downturn, many of these groups became desperate. They figured the economy is getting worse. Now is the time. And they did crazy things. And in, Greensboro, North Carolina, the Communist Workers' Party challenged the Ku Klux Klan to a fight. They had a death to the Klan rally, and the Klan showed up and shot 5 of them. It was called the Greensboro Massacre. The Revolutionary Communist Party turned against China and had a very provocative demonstration and attacked the Chinese embassy on the day it opened, penetrated White House grounds to attack Deng Xiaoping. You can read all about it in my book. We now know this was because the RCP was infiltrated by the FBI and by a right-wing organization called Western Goals that was controlling their activities. And there were a number of things that went on. It became very clear that the American working class was becoming more and more right-wing. They were on hostage crisis, and the rise of Ronald Reagan happened. And at that point, around the time Ronald Reagan got elected, 1981, 1982, the new communist movement went into retreat. There was just a feeling that they had spent 10 years in factories trying to win over their co-workers to be communists, trying to build communist factions among white industrial workers, and the working class didn't want to hear it, and there was a great retreat. And all the communist groups stepped back from doing what they're supposed to do, building communism among the broad masses of people. Some of the communist groups began focusing on, just trying to infiltrate the labor union bureaucracy. There was, for example, there's a group called Solidarity, and it's old communists who have tried to infiltrate the labor union bureaucracy. Some of the communist groups focused specifically on just supporting the Democrats and campaigning for the Democrats. And a lot of the communist groups dissolved into DSA as China was politically shifting and not offering political direction. Because of that, DSA started, scooping up a lot of Maoists and bringing them into the Democratic Party. You also had, there was, like, for example, you had some of these groups that just started running peace rallies and kind of keeping the anti-war movement going, running the peace rallies in Washington, D.C. You had the Revolutionary Communist Party deciding that most of the workers in America were what they called bourgeoisified, and saying that only the impoverished people, only the lumpen proletariat could make the revolution. And that there was just a great retreat. Communists in their mass in America decided that we can't win over average Americans. The bulk of the American population is too conservative, too right-wing. We have to retreat. We have to get jobs as university professors and teach classes on white gender privilege. We have to campaign for the Democrats. We have to just stage manage peace marches. We have to do something. We cannot win over the broad masses of Americans. It's just not possible. We tried it. But then we know what happened. The Soviet Union fell, got even harder to be a communist. But then, 2008, the U.S. economy collapsed. And interest in socialism and communism is rising among the U.S. public and continues to rise. Since Bernie Sanders, 2016, it's been rising. People in America are interested in communism. Meanwhile, around the world, the global communist movement has regrouped. China is now putting out a much more explicitly communist message, socialism with Chinese characteristics. Xi Jinping and his ideology is much more explicitly communist. Bolivarian socialism in Latin America is quite popular. And you have Venezuela and Nicaragua and various communist and Marxist groups that are aligned with with Russia and China that are preaching communism. You have the axis of resistance in the Middle East. Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, that has re-emphasized its anti-capitalist goals and solidified its relationship with Cuba and with Venezuela and with China, and joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And all over the world, you have a resurgence of communism, but it is new. It's not the same old communism. It's not atheistic, number one. The leader of Venezuela, Maduro, is Roman Catholic, and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, was also Roman Catholic. Leader of Nicaragua, Daniel Ortega, he is Roman Catholic. He's a Christian, and the slogan of the Nicaraguan government is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. Daniel Ortega was a Marxist revolutionary, a guerrilla fighter who overthrew Somoza and was a leader of the Nicaraguan Revolution, and then was voted back into power in 2006. And they are preaching communism, but it's very Christian, very religious. Meanwhile, there's a big market sector in socialist societies. They've discovered that the strength of a socialist society can be maintaining a healthy middle class of small business owners and private companies that work in coordination with the overall state central plan. So the global communist movement, the forces that want to break free from imperialism, are riding high right now. They're riding high right now. The Western capitalist system is collapsing because of a crisis of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profits. Capitalism can't handle the computer revolution. It can't handle artificial intelligence. This problem that is unique to the capitalist system, where people are homeless because there are too many houses, where people are hungry because there is too much food, when abundance and efficiency in production creates poverty, that has been taken to a far higher scale than ever before. What Marx wrote about, the problem of overproduction, the irrationality of the capitalist system. This problem is now on display before the entire planet, and more pronounced and serious than ever before. Human creativity and human brilliance has exceeded the narrow restraints of the profit system of distribution. The market is too narrow to contain the human brilliance. Human beings with artificial intelligence, with computers, we have exceeded the narrow restraints of the market, and our ability to create and build a prosperous life is greater than it has ever been. But it is the capitalist mode of distribution and the organization of production only for profit and for the profit of private owners, the lack of central planning that is holding back human creativity and holding back the ability of the human race to advance. And so the need for socialism and the need for a centrally planned economy and the need for the defeat of imperialism. And I'm getting all the super chats that are coming in. I don't see any Rumble. Oh, there's 2 Rumble rants already. Those will be first. I don't see any Rockfin tips yet. But yeah, I'm getting everything. So don't worry. You're all on the list. The need for socialism is more pronounced than ever before. And now is the time for what we lost with the crushing of the Communist Party during McCarthyism, and what the new Communist Party attempted to build amid very unfertile ground and difficult conditions. Now is the time for the axis of resistance to set up shop on American soil once again and lay the basis for the anti-monopoly coalition, the alliance to defeat the imperialists that is needed. What William Z. Foster wrote about in this book, the anti-monopoly coalition, it's time to build it. And the conditions are ripe globally and domestically for the construction of such a thing. Now, I will quickly read to you what William Z. Foster wrote about it, right? Why not? Why not? I'll just quickly read to you what he said about what we are trying to do. This is what William Z. Foster wrote, 1948. In order to put the United States firmly on the path toward peace and democracy and the general well-being, the power of the monopolists who dominate our country must be curbed and broken. And the people themselves must take political charge under the leadership of the working class. The struggle for socialism grows inevitably out of the everyday fight of the workers and their allies, especially against the present menaces of economic chaos, fascism, and war. In good time, the American people, on the basis of the existing conditions, will decide how and in what form they will introduce socialism. The way our party foresees the possible development of the future is along the following lines. First, we propose the election of a democratic coalition based on a broad, united front combination of workers, small farmers, Negroes, professionals, small business groups, and other democratic elements who are ready to fight against monopoly, economic breakdown, fascism, and war. This type of united front government could well have behind it the overwhelming majority of the American people, as it has in other lands. It goes without saying that the election of such a democratic government could only be brought about in the face of a powerful and surely violent opposition from organized reaction. Obviously, it would be an extremely difficult proposition to elect a truly democratic government in the face of this strong, violent, reactionary opposition. Second, our party contends that such an anti-fascist, anti-war, democratic coalition government once in power, would be compelled to either move to the left or die. With state power in its hands, it would be forced to pass over from the more or less defensive program upon which it was elected to an offensive policy. Confronted with the sabotage and open resistance of big business, it would have no alternative other than this if it hoped to realize any of the progressive legislation of its program and ensure staying in power. A people's government would be forced to proceed to curb and undermine the power of the monopolies by adopting far-reaching policies of nationalization of banks and major industries, breaking up the big land holdings, and the beginning of a planned economy, the elimination of reactionary elements from control of the army, the schools, and industry, as well as various other measures to weaken monopoly and strengthen the working class as the leading progressive force in the nation. Third, a democratic, anti-fascist, anti-war government under the violent attacks of the capitalists and in efforts to find solutions to burning economic and political problems, if it were to survive, would necessarily move towards socialism, much as the people's democracies of Eastern and Central Europe are now doing. Some liberals believe a united coalition government in this country would introduce a regime of progressive capitalism. But this is a naive illusion. Capitalism is now in its monopoly stage and is hopelessly reactionary. Capitalism, any people's government in our time, in order to be progressive, inevitably must move towards socialism. American socialism, beyond question, will have its own specific forms and methods, but basically it will be the same as socialism in other countries, with monopoly capital completely defeated, the industries and natural resources in the hands of the people, production for general use instead of profit, and the working class as the leader of the entire people. Only in this way will the country and the world finally be freed from the danger of poverty, economic chaos, fascist slavery, and murderous war. The steps could be taken legally in a people's government, notwithstanding the opposition of the capitalists, however violent, to promote the election of a progressive coalition government of this type. By force of circumstances, would move to the left and eventually to socialism on the general pattern of Eastern people's democracies is obviously not to advocate a program of force and violence, as the enemies of the Communist Party notwithstanding. The charge of the Department of Justice that our party advocates the forcible overthrow of the government is a brazen, conscious lie. The plain fact of the matter is that the communist movement in this country, as well as abroad, since the Seventh World Congress of 1935, has been going along on the practical theory that in this period, because of broad mass struggles against fascism and war, it had become possible in a whole number of democratic countries, including the United States, to legally elect democratic governments which could, by curbing and defeating capitalist violence, orient themselves in the direction of building socialism. Is it possible to elect a democratic coalition, an anti-monopoly government in the United States, the stronghold of world capitalism? It is a sinister fact that civil rights in this country, notably since the end of the war, have been seriously whittled away. But the United States is by no means at the stage of fascism, nor do we communists consider American fascism to be inevitable. The big popular upsurge in the recent presidential election was a dramatic justification of our faith in the democratic strength of the American people. It showed a profound anti-fascist and anti-war sentiment among the masses. In the event of an economic crisis or war, this mass democratic upsurge would be vastly greater and more clear-sighted. Our party's political line is thus based on the assumption that it is possible under the present conditions in the United States for the broad masses of the people, militantly led by trade unions and a strong mass political party, to elect a coalition anti-monopoly government. How long this is possible and may last in the face of fascist trends in this country is problematical. But if we should get fascism, if the United States is reduced to the level of fascist Spain, then communists will also know how to reshape their policies to meet that kind of situation. It may well be asked, what resistance will American capitalism be able to make when the great masses of the people finally decide, as they surely will, to establish socialism? Today, American capitalism is strong, but it is not as strong as it appears to be, nor has it got a permanent lien on its present strength. Now, it is true, Wall Street is the world bully and is busy trying to organize civil wars in various countries and to arm itself and other capitalist countries for another world war. But what will its power of resistance to socialism be when, as may likely be, the vast bulk of the world has already gone socialist, with its own foreign markets dried up, when it is undermined by economic crisis, and when it may have just about wrecked itself by its projected world war, and when its working class has developed a Marxist-Leninist ideology and sets about to bring socialism? It may well turn out that it will be far easier for the American working class in the midst of a socialist world to establish socialism in the country that now appears to be the case with American capitalism at the peak of its strengths. Who can foretell these things? Certainly, we Marxist-Leninists do not indulge in prophecy. In connection with the fight for eventual socialism, there are three basic considerations to be borne in mind. First, the question is not that the Social Democrats want to bring about socialism in a legal manner and the communists want to establish it by violence. Such a placing of the question is utter nonsense. The true issue is that the Social Democrats do not fight for socialism at all. Their line leading to the buttressing of capitalism, whereas communists do fight for socialism and their relentless struggle against capitalist resistance, and they adapt their strategy and tactics to the given situation. Second, the question is not whether the capitalists will or will not use violence to prevent the establishment of socialism. Of course they will use violence here as well as elsewhere, and it would be silly to think otherwise. Lenin taught us that long ago. Are not the capitalists, even at this very moment, attempting to organize another world war in their effort to murder socialism? The real question, therefore, is how to confront the capitalists with such a gigantic mass movement of the people in broad democratic political movements that they will be relatively isolated and unable to organize the effective violence against us for their cause. This is the purpose of the Communist United Front and anti-fascist policy. Third, the question, finally, is not whether or not there will be socialism in the United States or the rest of the world. History has already settled that matter. Socialism will come eventually, regardless of all the violent efforts of the capitalists to stop it. The real issue is to bring about socialism with the minimum of capitalist violence and at the earliest possible date. The communist line is the way of peaceful, advanced, and social progress. The policy of the capitalists leads to mass suffering, political enslavement, and devastating war. That is The Twilight of World Capitalism by William Z. Foster, laying out our aim, our purpose, to build an anti-imperialist united front, to stop the march toward fascism and war that is inevitably built in to a system of production organized for profit. This is our aim. We aim to stop the danger of a new world war. We aim to unite with small business owners and libertarians against the monopolists and their fascist degrowth policies. We seek to protect the civil liberties of those who would protest and organize and challenge the power structure. We seek to stop the march toward a low-wage police state. We seek to fight for jobs and health care and education for the working class and for the population. We seek to construct a broad, united front within American society to impose the imperialists and their agenda of impoverishment, fascism, and war. That is our purpose. And that was the purpose that the Communist Party had when it functioned as a healthy organization. That was the aim of the new communist movement of the 1970s, which they tried to do, but were unable to do in unfertile conditions. And it is our purpose in this time to build an anti-monopoly coalition, to unite all who can be united in order to defeat the drive for war, to defeat the monopolies, and to fight for working families. That is our purpose. That is our aim. That is what we will be striving to do here in the United States. And it is the message of the Center for Political Innovation. So take that for what you will. All that we do should be focused on building the anti-monopoly coalition, the anti-imperialist united front. Everything that we do must be done with that purpose in mind. There is nothing more important at this time than stopping World War III, stopping the low-wage police state, protecting our civil liberties. That is the urgent necessity of our time. So, on that note, names and locations. I will call you out. You're on the list. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Who's with us? Sue in Hollywood is with us. Maddie in California. Cleveland, Ohio, Dustin Schlesinger. Dan in America. Mima in California. Ryan in Kansas City. Jenny in Cincinnati. AJ from NJ. Steve in Boston. Patch in Arizona. Max Wells in North Carolina. Jamie in St. Paul, Minnesota. Panos in Greece, Juan, Patrick in Maine, John McCarthy in Chicago, Victory Gin in New Mexico, St. David's, Bermuda, Seasoned Noob in China, Nick Lynch in Daphne, Alabama, Bob Troy in New York, Kinky in Joshua Tree, shout out to you, Bob Troy in New York, Liverpool, UK, Cockpit F-35s in South Carolina, Liverpool, United Kingdom, Mindanao to Midwest, Marius in Massachusetts. Zach Brunch is in Virginia. Check out his TikTok, by the way. Zach has an amazing TikTok channel. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Far Long Gone Uncensored in Canada. Terry in Portland. Shout out to Terry, and shout out to everyone I saw this weekend in Portland. Shout out to Chris. Shout out to Rose. Shout out to Miles. Shout out to Michael. Shout out to Catherine. Shout out to Marissa. Shout out to Gustavo. Shout out to Elizabeth. Shout out to, oh my goodness, who else was there? Who am I forgetting? Oh my goodness, right? Shout out to everyone who was there. It was so great to see everyone. It was really, really great. Oh, Lori is out in Oklahoma. Yeehaw. Dr. Waldorf, shout out to you if I saw you, right? Work in progress in Ottawa. DC in Cleveland. Welcome, DC. Yes. Mariah in North Carolina. Happy Monday. Happy Monday to you. I'm having a busy week. This is the big UN week. I have to cover the United Nations. It's going to be a busy week for me, it looks like. Can't say too much about what we got planned, but looks exciting. I mean, I hear all kinds of different things. When this kind of work is up and down, and you never really know what's happening. But it looks like I'm going to be doing some exciting stuff in the next 10 days. I keep hearing different things. It's like boom, 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 boom. Things are popping up. So wish me luck on that. We've got an exciting little bit of time here ahead of us. So that's pretty good. All right, so I've been doing the Rumble rants first. We got Jamie Turner in Idaho and Kiwi in Auckland, New Zealand. So first Rumble rant, thoughts on Kim Jong-un visiting Russia. right? Oh, we got Gabby in Chicago. Shout out to you, Gabby, beloved member of our community, and Dan in Liverpool, Texas. Brendan in Palo Alto. Caleb should do an event in Virginia. There you go. I did a couple events in DC this spring, but I'm sure I'll be back to that area very soon. But we want to do something in the South too. That's a whole nother story. But it's but I wanted to when it comes to Kim Jong-un visiting Russia, that's great, right? North Korea is a country that has been subjected to so much isolation and so much vicious attack by the imperialists. They've had to remain locked down and militarized as a country. And I was so excited when Donald Trump visited the Korean Peninsula. Shout out to the person who gave me this beautiful gift, right? This commemorative coin of Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un meeting. And now Kim Jong-un spent a long time in Russia, and the imperialists, the United States is like, they can't do that. Yeah, they can. The USA tries to drive Russia out of the global economy, and it tries to drive North Korea out of the global economy. And then they start trading with each other, and they're like, they can't do that. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. North Korea is very good at making weapons. Russia needs weapons for the fight that's happening. North Korea is a country that's got lots of minerals in those mountains. And, I hope that that Biden will meet with Kim Jong-un, just as Putin has done, just as Trump did. And I hope that we can move toward peaceful reunification of the Korean Peninsula and setting up a government for the entire peninsula in which every party, including the Korean Workers' Party, is represented. That's all that North Korea has ever wanted. They have wanted the right to participate in a coalition government in the entire peninsula. And I hope that we can move toward that. I know that Russia would probably be strongly in favor of such a thing, of reunifying the North and South with different political parties in government. And that Russia and North Korea, they have a long history together. I think it's a great thing that Kim Jong-un went and visited Russia, and he visited the different military sites. He visited the different, factories, and it was great. And I hope that Russia can press for improving things. And I'm hoping that there can be a de-escalation in global affairs. The way things are right now with Ukraine, exploding, and on top of that, very important, John, very, very important. And with provocations on Taiwan, I hope that the Korean Peninsula can start to thaw. And then on top of that, I hope that can lead to the improvement of relations around the world. That's my hope. So there we go. All right. What's the next Rumble rant? What is the long-term connection between the oil industry and the Bush family? Well, Bush is a New England old money Republican. He's from Connecticut, and the Bush family, they are part of that Eastern establishment. You talk about the U.S. politics, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, the Morgans. These are the entrenched, wealthy families that kind of dominate U.S. politics. There's a very good book I would recommend by Webster Tarpley, George Bush, The Unauthorized Biography, that goes into great detail about the Bush family and their history. Bush is a CIA guy. He was the director of the CIA at one point. He ran the Office of U.S. Relations, the U.S. Interests Office in China, before the USA established diplomatic relations with China, when the USA just kind of had a foreign interest office in Beijing during the time of Mao's life, before the rise of Deng Xiaoping. And that the Bush family, it's a wealthy New England family that's part of that Rockefeller network, that old money Eastern establishment. Read The Anglo Establishment by Carol Quigley, The Anglo-American Establishment. Read The Yankee and Cowboy War. Read Bush, The Unauthorized Biography by Webster Tarpley. Read There Is No Limit to Growth by Lyndon LaRouche. You'll read all about, people acknowledge it. Carol Quigley and all kinds of people, Carl Oglesby, they all acknowledge that there is one faction among the American elite that is the big oil faction. Now, on top of that, the Bush family just owns certain oil in Texas. They own some oil fields, and et cetera. But the Bush family are very much a creation of that New England old money establishment, which it's funny that George W. Bush, his whole image was, I'm a cowboy. I'm George W. Bush, Commander-in-Chief of America, cowboy. that was his image, but he was from Connecticut. And in fact, when Ronald Reagan was forced to put Bush as his running mate, many in the Republican Party booed him because a lot of the hard right Republicans saw the Bush family as representative of the old money Eastern establishment that had been driven out of the Republican Party by the John Birch Society and by the hard right, and they saw Bush as the representative of the neoconservatives, whereas Reagan was seen as kind of a hard right industrialist and military guy. And these divisions among the right wing are important to pay attention to. There have been different layers. The neocons represented that old money Eastern establishment in the same way the New Left represented them, whereas the John Birch Society and the Koch brothers and the lower levels of capital, to some degree or other, those folks had a lot of influence in the Republican Party. And there was a big shift during the Obama years when it seems like the Eastern establishment and the folks who'd been backing the neocons started backing the Democrats. The New Left and the New Right are both synthetic creations. And I talk about this. I talk about this a lot. Go and read my book, Where is America Going? Or listen to the audiobook of it. Tyler McConnell made a great audiobook of my book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution, right? And this book it blew Kim Iverson's mind, right? Go watch the interview I did with Kim Iverson about this book. It blew her mind in many, many ways. And I will link the audiobook. So if you want to listen to the audiobook, the link to buy the actual book is down below, but I'll pull up the audiobook. A lot of people like to listen to audiobooks. Tyler McConnell is a great member of our community. It's available as an audiobook. You can just listen to it while you clean your apartment or you exercise at the gym. You can go listen to this book. This book talks about divisions in the American ruling class. It talks about who backed Obama. It talks about who backed Bush, who backed Trump. Right? You can go listen to it. Right? Right? So there you go. You can go listen to it, right? MAGA communism is not my brand, but this book is probably the closest thing to a MAGA communist manifesto that has ever been published. Mariah, it's another Rumble rant, so it'll go first. This is Mariah. Speaking of Bush, do you know about Bush Sr.'s oil company connections in Indonesia to Barack Obama's stepfather, Lolo Soetoro? I was not aware of that. I had no idea about those connections. I do know about Lolo Soetoro and Barack Obama's stepfather. And people, I really enjoyed Wayne Madsen wrote a very, very good book. I recommend Wayne Madsen's book. The Construction of a President. It's a very, very good book. Wayne Madsen, his book showing how Barack Obama, is very much a CIA. The Manufacturing of a President by Wayne Madsen is a really good book. And he's a former NSA guy himself. He's a former intelligence guy. And he wrote this book, The Manufacturing of a President, showing how Barack Obama, his mother, his grandparents, they ran the Bank of Hawaii, which was how the CIA funneled money all over the Pacific. And then, his mother married a general in the Indonesian military after the CIA overthrew the Indonesian government and was committing genocide against ethnically Chinese people. And his mother was there being paid by the Ford Foundation to do academic research in the aftermath of a CIA coup. Barack Obama's first job when he left college, he worked at something called the International Business Corporation, which was just this group that goes around the world putting on workshops about the greatness of the free market in third world countries, which is clearly a CIA front. There you go. There you go. I mean, it's a great, great book. Great book. I recommend it. But I was not aware of the connection to Bush's oil company. But it doesn't surprise me because it's the same strata. It's the same strata that back, these folks. So the neocons and the so-called woke left, it's the same layer. It is the New England establishment. First, they took control of the right against the libertarian and paleo-conservative element. Then they took control of the so-called left against communists and genuine anti-imperialists. All righty. You're on the list. All right. Okay. So now, I'm going to start answering questions over here. I'm not talking about that other thing, that thing people in the chat are talking about. I'm just not talking about it anymore. I've said enough about it, and I'm above that. I really am. I mean, we're trying to build a serious in real life organization here. We don't have time for silliness. We just don't have time for that. So, Flavio, if you want me to put on a show for you, I'm not going to put on a show for you. As much as social media is rigged, I mean, look at the numbers, right? Social media is totally rigged to incentivize me to talk about silliness, right? I said everything I'm comfortable saying, and I probably said too much. I probably should have said less than I said, and I'm not saying more because it's not my problem and it's not my business, and I don't care. I don't care, and I don't like that social media is rigged to try and get me to dwell on bullshit. So there we go. All right. David Fox, we love you, and it's too bad you can't be around. I already acknowledged that. You can't talk about this kind of thing on YouTube. You can't talk about this, Dan. This is YouTube, right? This is YouTube, and if I were to start answering that question, I would have my channel shut down, Dan. Come on now. I mean, I've got questions. You've got questions. There's channels that both of us watch that address these things. But yeah, I'm not going there. Not going there. Also not going here, right? I appreciate the super chat, but there's some things I'm not talking about. How can we beat racism in a non-liberal fake way? Now, that's a good question. Look at the history of the Communist Party. Look at how in San Francisco, the dock workers would go on strike. And every time they would go on strike, because they were racist and they had whites-only unions, the black community would be scabs, and the union would be defeated every time they went on strike. But then, when the Communist Party adopted an anti-racist position and made one of the demands of the strike that black people be hired to work on the docks, then in 1934, they won the strike. The 1934 dock workers strike, where the Communist Party put the needs of the black community and their right to work on the docks as part of the strike and built support for the strike among the black community, where the Communist Party denounced racism. That was a moment where all workers advanced. In fact, the International Longshore Warehouse Union, the ILWU, even up to today, is one of the strongest unions because, definitely we'll talk about that. Talked about it before, but there you go. We'll talk about it, definitely. Even up to today, the International Longshore Warehouse Union is one of the strongest labor unions, in the country. And it was because they opposed racism. And the rise of the CIO and the rise of the United Auto Workers, the way these industrial unions, like the steel workers unions, the auto workers unions, the dock workers unions, the way they got to be strong was by dishing racism and by championing the needs of the black community. And that's not a fake liberal way of viewing things. The problem with the woke and liberal narrative is it wants to appeal to white workers to be anti-racist on the basis of guilt. You have it too good. You should be ashamed. And most people don't want to hear that message. That was not the approach of the Communist Party. The approach of the Communist Party was that racism hurt all workers, most especially the oppressed, and that by championing the needs of the oppressed, the entire working class can advance. That was the communist position. Fighting for black people is fighting for yourself. It is fighting for your own self-interest, right? And that has been lost. And you're on the list as well. That has been lost as well, right? It's been lost. And, wokeism is largely, it's white skin privilege, Noel Ignatin. It is, as Jenny Lynn says, it's fake and disingenuous. And it disregards all the great history of showing that racism hurts all workers. Racism hurts all workers, especially the oppressed. So there we go. Now, I did want to mention, and thanks for the reminder, that, the Party of Communists, while I was out in Seattle, I had a great opportunity to meet with the Party of Communists. And the Party of Communists, they are currently battling to get their website back. A group of wreckers who don't support Russia and Ukraine seized their website. And they are in a legal battle with a group of 5 losers called the American Council of Bolsheviks, who seized their website and accused them in a cancel culture screed of all kinds of bullshit. So they are raising money right now for their legal battle to retake their website. So I am going to share the GoFundMe where they're raising money for the legal battle. So, and shout out to Joe, shout out to Sam, great people at the John Reed Center, great comrades. It was great to spend time with them. And they've asked that I share their legal fund for their legal battle that they're waging. The Greek Communist Party is backing these 5 people that seized their website because the Greek Communist Party is anti-Russian. The Party of Communists maintains a pro-Russian position, an anti-imperialist position, and because of that, the Greek communists are backing 5 people, who seized their website, and they are in court with them. So there we go. Thank you for the reminder, Joe. I do appreciate it, and thank you for the reminder, Sam. And if you want to support the Party of Communists, their legal fund, to retake their website is here. So there we go. Some Russians are using the conflict to profit. I don't know about this, Battle Cossack. I saw the same press releases that you saw, but I would urge you not to repeat things until we know the whole story. Now, let's look. Let's see. Has Russia given an answer about that? Right? Has Russia answered that? Right? Right? Let's see. If there's been a comment on that from the Russian Foreign Ministry. I saw those reports, just like you, and they were concerning. But let's look for the answer, because the U.S. media lies all the time. Could be true, but let's look for the facts. Let's look for the facts. Now, has there been a comment on that by the Russian Foreign Ministry yet? Right? I'm not seeing comment from the Russian Foreign Ministry about that issue yet. So when they have a comment, we will obviously hear their side of the story. But until then, I don't want to repeat what I just hear in mainstream media. Right? We know the imperialists are very much trying to divide Russia and Cuba. Right? That's very much what they want to do. Right? Biden, he wants to improve relations a little bit with Cuba, improve relations a little bit with Iran, so he can isolate Russia. This is the Brzezinski strategy. They view Cuba and Iran as, quote, satellite countries, and they want to isolate Russia and China, the major anti-imperialist centers, from smaller countries. That is their strategy. And that's why we're seeing Iran's funds being unfrozen right now. That's why Barack Obama went to Cuba. Right, is that they see, making nice with some smaller countries as a way of setting the stage for isolating Russia and attacking Russia, or isolating China and attacking China. That's what they're doing. And so, we don't know what this was. This could have been CIA people pretending to be Russians who did this, for all we know. We don't know what really happened. We don't trust the imperialists, but, there's bad things in this world. Just because countries are anti-imperialist doesn't mean they never do any bad thing, right? And just because countries are on the right side of history doesn't mean they don't have internal contradictions. But we know about all the criminal organizations in Ukraine. And that doesn't make it right. We're not going to do the whataboutism thing and say, well, that makes it okay. If this is what it is, that's not a good thing. And the Cubans have arrested people for this. So we'll find out. We will find out Russia's side of the story when we're ready. But I'm not ready to just jump on this, because they'll jump on anything to demonize Russia right now. Russia's side of the story never gets heard in American media. Everything negative gets exaggerated, and all the horrendous atrocities of the Ukrainian forces The bombing that they've been carrying out for the last 8 years against the peoples of Donbass gets ignored. So before you repeat something, I would urge you to look into it and until we've heard the Russian version of events and what's really going on there, right? We've heard that some folks got arrested. Well, if they were really trafficking people, they should be arrested. Human trafficking is a crime, right? But if it really is what it was, we don't know. All right. The Uhuru case, they're coming up this Thursday. They're going to have oral arguments. And that is really important, right? Because they should dismiss this case immediately. It has absolutely no legal basis. The Uhuru movement, all they did was exercise their freedom of speech and freedom of assembly and their freedom to travel. They have a right to visit Russia. They have a right to protest around Ukraine. They have a right to write articles around Ukraine. They have a right to do that. And because they have a right to do that, this charge that somehow they are Russian agents is bullshit. And the judge, if he has any ounce of integrity, will immediately dismiss the whole thing, right? They should just immediately dismiss the whole thing. And again, I've got to say this. Why, all these forces, not naming names, that claim to be anti-imperialist, why are they not speaking about the Uhuru movement? I'm speaking about the Uhuru movement as loudly as I possibly can. And John McCarthy is, and other people are, but some people are not. They're not seeing how scary the Uhuru case really is, right? People that claim to support Russia, they're not saying it. And in fact, they're saying the opposite. They're spreading rumors about the Uhuru case. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. If they can set a precedent and imprison the Uhuru movement, at that point, anti-imperialist activism of all kinds becomes pretty much illegal. We should all be doing everything we can to support the Uhuru movement, screaming from the heavens, hands off Uhuru. In every single stream I make, I put a hands off Uhuru bug in the thumbnail, right? Yep. Thank you for standing up for Uhuru. You and Kim Iverson are some of the few people. Yeah. And Tucker Carlson, Glenn Beck, I mean, absolutely, Gala. We have got to scream from the heavens. If they can jail them, and all these people that want to dwell on internet bullshit, right? How is any of that important? How is any of that important compared to a situation where they are about to set a precedent to make it illegal to do what we're doing right now, right? If they can jail the Uhuru movement, they can jail me for making this stream. They can jail everybody who's on the internet talking about Russia and China and spreading the truth. They can jail all of us. People don't seem to realize how serious, you're on the list, Gabby. People don't seem to realize how serious that case really is. And we need to do everything we possibly can to highlight that case. Oh, wow. We got another Rumble rant that just came in. To highlight that case, to talk about that case, we need to do everything we can. Now, another Rumble rant. Thoughts on Javier Milei, the Economist, calls him the libertarian candidate. I don't know enough about Argentine politics, Delta V. I just don't know enough about it. I do know that in Argentina, the Libertarian Party is different. It's more of a mainstream party. Here in the United States, the Libertarian Party is more fringe. It is, there's libertarians in the Republican Party. But in Argentina, in their political system, this guy is actually a more mainstream candidate, but he does have, Milton Friedman-ish views. I know that much, but I don't know enough to comment on it further, Delta V. I just don't want to say anything. I owe it to you to not speak on things that I don't know enough about. So there you go. All right. When you talk about the Carnegie family and their influence on U.S. politics, well, it's a steel company, right? The Carnegies, that was a steel company. Right. And there's a lot of stuff named after them, right? The Carnegie Mellon Foundation, Carnegie Hospital, and it's a wealthy steel corporation. Andrew Carnegie was a big steel tycoon, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And they're one of these old New England wealthy families. They're one of these industrialist families who eventually became financiers. It's one of the richest families in America. They used to talk about, what is it? The Mellons, the Morgans, the DuPonts, the Rockefellers, who else? Right? Mellons, Morgans, Rockefellers, DuPonts, you know, I think the Vanderbilts are in there. The Vanderbilts. Yeah, there are a number of families. There's a good book by Ferdinand Lundberg. He wrote America's 60 Families. And that describes the circles of wealth and power that you often don't hear about. One thing, we're always hearing in mainstream media, Elon Musk is the richest man in America. Bullshit. Bill Gates, the richest man in America. Bullshit. Right? We hear, Carlos Slim is the richest man in the world. Bullshit. These people are so poor that they keep all their money in their own name. The richest people in the world are so wealthy, no one knows how much money they have because it is so elaborately set up in so many different trusts and foundations and businesses and networks. They don't know how much money they have. When you start talking about the richest of the rich, right? The Gettys, there's another billionaire family, the Gettys, right? The Gettys, the DuPonts, the Mellons, the Morgans. I mean, you're talking about people who no one can calculate how much money they have because they have so much money. What? That is what we're talking about there. We're talking about a group of ultra rich people. Right? Talking about a group of ultra rich people who have so much money and so much wealth that no one can figure out how much they have. And that's the elite, that Eastern establishment, those oil bankers, those old money folks. They have so much money, nobody even knows. And and that is something that many people can't fathom. And they have huge amounts of wealth, and they have huge amounts of influence, and they prefer not to flaunt their wealth, and they prefer to not be seen, and they prefer to rule by proxy, via institutions and foundations that they set up. They push the money one way, they push money another way. You're dealing with a very, very different entity. These are the people, the generations that have gone to Harvard for generation after generation after generation. So there you go. All right. Thoughts on Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia? Well, I answered a Rumble rant about that, but let me just repeat that it's a great sign. It is a sign that North Korea is not isolated any longer, and it is being more accepted into the world. It is a sign that trade between Russia and North Korea will increase. It is a sign that Russia is solidifying its relationship with many different allies around the world. It is a sign that North Korea can have more business and more economic opportunity, creating weapons for Russia, creating, cell phones and computer chips, providing minerals to Russia and the emerging network of manufacturers. It'll also put pressure on the United States to establish better relations with North Korea, to pull them away from Russia. And I hope that it will lead to, to Biden also meeting with Kim Jong-un. Because it seems like, Biden, when he said that he was willing to meet with Kim Jong-un, and without preconditions, that was because they knew the meeting with Russia was coming. And their strategy, as I've emphasized, is they want to pull the so-called satellite countries away. And so they see that Russia and North Korea are getting closer, that Russia, amid the all-out economic sanctions from the United States, has no real reason. Why should they obey U.S. sanctions to not do business? I mean, why shouldn't they just full-on embrace North Korea and their economy? Right? Why shouldn't they? And so in this context, the United States is struggling to maintain control. The world is slipping out of the hands of the United States. The USA sees Venezuela and Iran do business and says, you can't do that. Yes, they can. Right? The USA tries to isolate Iran, tries to isolate Venezuela, and the two countries send each other ships and send each other food and medicine. And, and then there you go. What are they going to do about it? Right? The USA says to Russia and North Korea, you can't do business. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. There was a time where the United States could just completely destroy countries with sanctions. During the 1990s, Iraq was subject to sanctions. The USA wouldn't let them import chlorine. Their water became, not properly purified, and at least 1.2 million people died. Cuba was devastated. North Korea had the arduous march because they couldn't import petroleum. In the 1990s, if the USA wanted to put the screws on a country and isolate them, they could kill millions of people. They could destroy countries, devastate countries economically. That's not the case anymore, right? If the United States wants to write you out of the global economy, you do business with Russia, you do business with China, you join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran is now a full member of the BRICS, and one of the rules of the BRICS is you cannot have sanctions on any BRICS members. So all the BRICS countries are going to have to not abide by U.S. sanctions on Iran, right? And they can't be sanctioning Iran, right? There's a whole new world economy emerging, and the United States is isolating itself rather than isolating the countries it targets. Scientology seems like an FBI-funded org. No. Okay. There's a grain of truth in that. L. Ron Hubbard, founder of Scientology, was Lafayette Ronald Hubbard. Ron Hubbard. Now, to all you Lord of the Rings fans, when I first heard his name, I thought it was L. Ron Hubbard, as in Lord of the Rings, Council of Elrond. But no, it's Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard. He was the founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard was a U.S. Navy intelligence officer, and he brags about that, right? It was not a secret, and he developed the techniques of Scientology by doing experiments on veterans with PTSD, right? And, he studied hypnosis, and he was, I guess, trying to help veterans of World War II and veterans of the Korean War who had PTSD. He was trying to use hypnosis methods to help them overcome their trauma. And Scientology, what we now call Scientology, came out of that. That is true. So that you want to talk about an intelligence connection, that's the intelligence connection. That L. Ron Hubbard was doing it as a spook. He was doing it as an intelligence officer. What's very clear is that while the government may have helped L. Ron Hubbard set it up, right, which, he was an intelligence officer, and he did develop the techniques in doing work with veterans in the capacity of being an intelligence officer, it's very clear they've gone rogue. Scientology is its own entity. It's well connected, and for a long time, it was very, very powerful in Hollywood. But now, as you can see, there is kind of a war on Scientology. The state, there are sections of the deep state that want to eliminate the power of Scientology, primarily probably because of Scientology's anti-medicine stance. They do not believe in medications. They don't believe in psych meds. They don't believe in psychological medicines of any kind. They are against SSRIs. They're against antipsychotic drugs. They are against psychic medicines. They are against it because they believe mental health is rooted in their religion, their practices. So because of that, they are very opposed to the pill-pushing modern mental health industry. That's what they do now, right? If somebody has a psychological fit and commits a crime and they take them to the mental hospital, the first thing they do is they try to medicate them and they get them out of there, right? It's a pill-pushing industry. Well, Scientology is against it for their own reasons because they think the answer is Scientology. So there has been a push and pull in Hollywood, okay? There has been a push and pull. What's interesting is that Donald Trump seemed to be very much supporting Scientology, and that Scientology has entered an alliance with Epoch Times, which is the Falun Gong, the crazy anti-China religious group that tries to pressure Trumpers. They are in the Trump camp, Scientology is. And in fact, Donald Trump appointed, what is her name? Greta Van Susteren? Is that her name? Greta Van Susteren? Right. Yeah, Greta Van Susteren. She got fired from Fox News, and then Donald Trump gave her a job at Voice of America, right? And that, Donald Trump, to some degree or other, was aligning himself with the Church of Scientology. After Donald Trump was elected, Tom Cruise made the movie American Made, which was all about the CIA and its involvement in the cocaine business. And it really emphasized Bill Clinton's cooperation with the CIA's cocaine business. So Scientology is its own thing, right? They're one little, I don't know what you want to call it. They are I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a Scientologist. It's not my place to defend their beliefs or practices, but it's very, very clear that they have a lot of, they at one point, they could stop a movie from being made. That's how much power they have. And that, especially in the last 2 decades, there has been a full mobilization to roll back their power in Hollywood. And I would assume that that is because the fact that they are against big pharma, for their own reasons. But I would also think there's a push and pull. The fact that they are in the Trump camp, right? They're in the Trump camp, and they're very solidly in the Trump camp. And I mean, they're aligned with Epoch Times. I mean, I'm sure they'll tell you, if you talk to them, you can be a Democrat or Republican, you can have any political views, but seemed like Donald Trump was kind of protecting them and the mainstream was against them. And it seems like because of that situation, right? We also know that the Cult Awareness Network, which is an intelligence operation, Steve Hassan, that crowd of people, they've been amping up their activities, right? No one had ever heard of them, right? And, the cult scare of the late 70s, when the deep state was, there was a clear war within the deep state. I even have a timeline of 1978 to 1981 at the back of this book as an appendix, right? The deep state, there was a war, different organizations were being used. Talk about that in this book too, because Bob was definitely being used in the big fight in the deep state during the Carter administration. But after that, once Ronald Reagan was in power, they sent Reverend Sun Myung Moon to prison briefly. And the Cult Awareness Network was shut down. And it seems like, 80s and 90s, you'd see TV specials here and there about the evils of cults or whatever. But the Steve Hassan people were marginal. But then during the Obama administration, they started rolling those people out. And Netflix is basically, at this point, I mean, Netflix is a wing of the Obama, camp. I mean, Obama owns and runs a Netflix studio. Susan Rice is on the board of Netflix. I am featured. I love this. There's a Netflix documentary called How to Become a Dictator, where at 2 different places, they show my face on the screen. I love this. They show my face on the screen and me yelling at some, pro-terrorist people in Washington, D.C. There's a group of people that are supporting Al-Qaeda, basically, that are, wanting the USA to send cruise missiles to destroy Syria. And I shout at them, "You are terrorist murderers." They show that clip of me twice in this Netflix documentary as I'm the face of bad. Right, of me in 2013 yelling at the White House. They show that clip twice in the Netflix film. That I shout, "You are terrorist murderers." They show that twice, 2 different times. They show my face. Every person in the world has sent me screenshots of that. "Oh my God, you're in the Netflix movie. Why are you all watching Netflix? You shouldn't be watching Netflix." But Netflix and the Steve Hassan people, Netflix has made it its mission. I cannot watch anything on Netflix that's not giving me a lecture about cults, right? They've got a million cult documentaries, Wild Wild Country, and this and that. And then on top of that, I watched a comedy series with my wife during the pandemic. It was about a cult. I watched, documentaries and fiction, everything. You watch a murder show, it's about a cult. I mean, it's like they're obsessed. And anytime you talk about a cult, if it's a documentary, this guy who talks like this, and his name is Dr. Steve Hassan. Dr. Steve Hassan shows up. Yes. And he starts talking about cults, and it's this nerdy guy who was a Moonie for 2 years when he was a 19-year-old. And they put him there. And that guy is, his mentor was Robert J. Lifton, one of the top U.S. military psychiatrists who was basically responsible for MK Ultra, the CIA brainwashing program. And he admits that he was involved in kidnappings, right? And he was kidnapping people. They have this layer of people, the deprogrammer movement. Their job is they go and, deprogram people. And the more I started looking into that, what was that guy, the Scientologist guy who was on that 70s show who just got convicted? the more I look into that case, the more questions I have, right? I mean, Danny something, I don't remember his name, right? I'm not saying he's innocent. I don't have any basis for saying that. But, that guy, he was a Scientologist, and all the women who accused him are ex-Scientologists who apparently met in some of these Scientology X meetings, which are part of the Steve Hassan network. I'm just telling you, some weird shit is happening, all right? And that there is a fight in the deep state, and Scientology's on one side, they're on the Trump side, and the Epoch Times side, and it appears that the liberal order has decided they have too much power in Hollywood and is fighting against them. Does that mean that they're not connected to the deep state? Of course they are, right? There's clearly Trump was protecting them and boosting them, right? And that this is the weird thing. The important thing you have to remember, and this is an important thing, right, is that the liberal order is at war at this point with all illiberalism. That's something people don't want to admit, right? During the Cold War, it was very clear there were illiberal groups that were aligned with the imperialists. Generally, people described them as fascists. And then there were illiberal groups that were anti-imperialist, communists. Right? It was pretty clear, right? The imperialists had their authoritarian mass movements, forces, governments, and the anti-imperialists had their mass movement and their forces and governments. But as we all know, during the Cold War, it started to get muddled. The Sino-Soviet split, Euro-communism, and the imperialists started recruiting various communists to do their work. Meanwhile, the communists discovered various non-communist forces they could cooperate with. There were sections of the Roman Catholic Church, especially in Latin America, that became very pro-communist. There were various governments, around the world that were willing to cooperate with the Soviet Union and were friendly to the Soviet Union, even though they weren't communist. And it started to get muddled. And then we also know that after the Soviet Union fell, George Soros and his allies started toppling all the anti-communist authoritarian regimes the USA had propped up during the Cold War. Why? Is it because George Soros just believes in freedom and democracy, right? Marcos, right? Shout out to Olympia Logic. She talks about this. Marcos, authoritarian regime, dictator of the Philippines, set up by the United States to fight communism in the Philippines. Well, the USA put that guy into power, armed him and backed him. But then the USA also, as the Soviet Union was weakening and getting ready to fall, started overthrowing him. Why? Because Marcos was not going to cooperate with austerity, and that authoritarian regimes, illiberal governments, tend to get in the way of austerity. And so Soros toppled Marcos, just like he toppled the governments of Eastern Europe. Neoliberalism wants an open society. It wants a weak government that is weak and pathetic and can't stand up to them and fight them. And illiberal authoritarian regimes, even if they're not communist, even if they are right-wing, tend to be a barrier to austerity, right? And so what we're seeing now is we're seeing a situation where all of these, what do you want to call them, counter gangs or illiberal movements, governments, organizations that the imperialists may have backed at one time to fight communists, they are now trying to get rid of because they are a barrier to their power. And that has forced many of them into a defensive position where suddenly they start doing good things. Great example of this, Noriega, right? Manuel Noriega was the dictator of Panama, military dictator of Panama. He was a brutal anti-communist. The USA gave him guns and all of that. But then after he was in power, he realized, hey, if I'm going to stay in power, I got to be popular. And so he started nationalizing things, and he started giving people free health care, and he started doing things. He was still the same guy who'd been backed by the United States and killed a lot of communists. But he was in power in Panama, and Panama is a very poor country. And so he started doing good things. So the USA invaded Panama and removed Marcos, right? That is how these things tend to work, right? Is that illiberal institutions, when they get attacked, they tend to get better. Right? Because they're under attack. They have to rally popular support for them by fighting the imperialists. The imperialists don't want any middleman. They want direct rule over everybody, right? And so any form of illiberalism is a threat to them. but they will also use illiberal entities for their own ends. But as they use illiberal entities, they're constantly threatening them at the same time, right? Islamic terrorist groups are used by the U.S. government around the world, but we also have Guantanamo Bay, where there's a bunch of, Al-Qaeda, Islamic kind of people getting tortured, right? And that the imperialists, you go and read about fourth generation warfare and William S. Lind, right? You go and read Gangs and Counter Gangs by Frank Kitson, the British intelligence leader, right? Illiberalism is the nature of human beings. Human beings are social creatures. We define ourselves in relation to other people, right? You are who you are because of your parents, because of the place you grew up, because of your friend. I mean, everything you think about yourself is based on feedback you get from other people. Human beings are social creatures. So illiberalism and the formation of cohesive groups is in human beings' nature. Human beings are going to form groups, and those groups can push back, or they can make decisions, right? That's what happens. Now, what the imperialists are trying to do is they want to break down all groups. They want to atomize all groups so that the only person who is giving you any feedback on your behavior is this thing. This is the only thing that's allowed to brainwash you, right? You're not allowed to have a group of friends at your school. You're not allowed to have a family. You're not allowed to have a church. You're not allowed to have a labor union or a political party. No. They want this thing to be the only thing that can brainwash you. That's what they want. The only reason they're against cults, the only reason they're against this kind of thing is because they want a monopoly for themselves. They don't want you to be part of a community. They don't want you to be part of an organization. Anything that could push back against them, they don't want. And they don't mind this thing because they can manipulate it and they can control it. And they don't mind that, right? Now, are there organizations that are abusive? Yes. Right? The Catholic Church, child molestation, it happened, right? Are there, Jim Jones, the people in where is it? And the people in Guyana, they all drank cyanide. Obviously, there can be organizations and groups, Nazi Germany, where people come together. I did not know that, John. Noriega tried to organize a debt strike versus the IMF. That is fascinating. I did not know that. Yes, there are groups of people that could be coercive and abusive. But human groups are also the entities that have done all the great things throughout history. Every building in the New York City skyline is the result of collective human labor, right? Look at the history of civilization, people coming together and believing in things together and fighting for a common cause, making sacrifices for that cause. That's where the greatest achievements in human history have come from. So, when people want to give you a lecture about, oh, you should just be an individual, what they mean is you should just have them control you, right? And it's the same way that they, there's this talk of democratic regression. I keep coming back to this because I repeat myself, but I'm repeating things that must be said, right? There's this article I read. And there's many articles along the same lines about how democracy is in retreat. There's democratic regression. And they talk about Hungary, they talk about Venezuela, and they talk about Russia. And these were democratic societies, but they became authoritarian regimes. They became illiberal authoritarian societies. Why? Well, Putin got elected. The majority of the Russian people voted for Putin. And then you say, well, how is that? What's wrong with that? Well, once Putin got elected, they say, he tampered with the independent institutions of society. He changed the military. That's true. He changed the police of Russia. That's true. He changed the economy of Russia, centered the economy of Russia around Gazprom and Rosneft. Putin got elected on a platform that he would change Russia, and he did it. And they say, well, that's not democracy anymore. Why? Well, because he tampered with the independent institutions. What do you mean the independent institutions? He tampered with the economy because under Yeltsin, the economy was being auctioned off to Wall Street. wasn't independent. It was under the dominion of Wall Street, and the country was bleeding economically, shedding population, mass hunger. He fixed that. Well, that's just how it's supposed to be, right? That's independent. It's independent if it serves them. Right? Venezuela, they say the same thing. They say, oh, well, Chavez got elected, but then he changed society. He changed the institutions. Yes, the military of Venezuela used to be just a tool of the U.S. military. But under Chavez, it was no longer independent and just a tool of U.S. imperialism. It became what? It became independent. No more. It became a tool of Venezuela, right? Whenever they're in charge, it's never dictatorship. That's just the way it's supposed to be. They rule by de facto, right? You don't have to make a rule that says U.S. imperialism rules. If you have a country and you have no rules and you have no military, the USA comes in there and takes it over. But when you set up your government and you say, we're going to have a military for us, and we're going to have an economy for us, suddenly they're like, that's a dictatorship. You can't do that. It's a dictatorship when they lose. It's a dictatorship when they can't win by de facto. And this is what it's brainwashing if it gets in the way of their brainwashing, right? That's the point, right? They rule by de facto. They teach us that them ruling the world, Wall Street and London ruling the world, the U.S. military threatening the planet, countries around the world being ground into poverty for Wall Street, that's just natural. That's just the way things are supposed to be. Meanwhile, anyone who does anything about it is being an authoritarian. They're being illiberal. Anyone who builds a mass movement to oppose them, this is what you need to understand. Okay? So there you go. All righty. These smaller countries should ask Gaddafi what happens when Obama shakes your hand. Well, it wasn't just Obama, John. You'll remember that Jimmy Carter also manipulated Libya. Billy Carter, Jimmy Carter's younger brother, went to Libya and became Gaddafi's drinking buddy and did all these parties with Gaddafi, dancing and all of this stuff. And, the result was Libya ended up being on the wrong side of the war in Afghanistan. And that was also a strategy of the Carter administration. And, Reagan, became more oppositional, bombed Libya, had a plan for even invading Libya. But yes, and then Barack Obama came into office and he arranged for BP, British Petroleum, to invest in Libya. They sent the Lockerbie bomber, the guy that some Libyan they arrested and accused of being the Lockerbie bomber. They sent him back to Libya and they gave him a big parade. Gaddafi referred to Obama as my little African son. The oil prices were very high during those years. So Libya's economy was surging because it's an oil-centered economy. But all this time that the USA was making nice with Libya, they were setting up their, NGOs, and they were preparing for a color revolution. So there you go. There you go. All righty. Thank you for standing up for Uhuru. You and Kim Iverson are some of the few people who do so. Yes, but there was a lot of noise when the case first started. We need to keep up the heat. People aren't doing enough to support the Uhuru movement. They are under vicious attack at this point. We need to raise their case from the heavens. From the heavens, we need to raise their case. All righty. Kids shouldn't be forced to learn about LGBT issues. Well, Gabby, if you mean little kids, yeah. I do think that when someone's in high school, they should know what lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender is. They should just know the basic facts about those cases. I think in order to be an adult, you need to have an education about these things. I will never forget a conversation I had when I was in high school. I played the trombone in the marching band. And I played the trombone, and the only other two trombone players were two young women, both of whom I went very conservative small town. And both of the other two trombone players were very, very religious young women from my town. One day, one of these very, very religious young women said to me, she said, Caleb, I heard that you think that being gay is not a choice. And I said, well, I don't think it is a choice, right? I don't think gay people choose to be gay. I think they are. And she said, well, I don't understand how anybody could think of that. And then I said, what do you mean? And she said, she put her arm around the girl next to her. She said, if I married her, that would be a choice, wouldn't it? And I said to her, do you want to marry her? And she said, no. And I said, well, then you're not gay. And she's like, wait, are you telling me that gay people feel about other girls the way I feel about boys? And I said, yes. And it was like a big oh moment for her, right? She had no idea. She believed that people were gay because they just wanted to rebel or they wanted to break the rules or something. She didn't realize that the basis of people being homosexual was that they had attraction to people of the same sex the way most people have attraction to people of the opposite sex. She didn't realize that. Well, it's important for people to have this kind of education. And you can't get this kind of education from the media, right? The media is crazy, right? So the basic facts for older kids, I'm not against, right? Just like you'd have to have education for kids to use condoms. Kids have to know, if an adult is doing something that is sexually inappropriate, to know, they're being molested or whatnot. I mean, I'm not against learning about these issues. What I don't think is, first of all, in the younger grades, I think that's more the parents' job in the younger grades as they get older. And there shouldn't be a political agenda in the education, right? It shouldn't be that, oh, we're teaching you this because it is therefore your duty to go organize in the streets and fight for. No, that shouldn't be it. There should be no agenda in the education. But people do need to know the basic facts of these things. Right. They do. People need to know these things, but, yeah, but the other thing that I think is that, when I was in school, there was a huge amount of accommodating, religious people, for example, the evangelicals in my area, they did not believe in Halloween. They thought Halloween was a satanic holiday. So my school actually changed the Halloween party to the Autumn Festival because they weren't, to accommodate the religious people that were against Halloween. And there was a huge effort to accommodate that. And even then, there were 2 or 3 kids who their parents were so against Halloween, they had to leave school because they couldn't, even though it was the Autumn Festival, didn't matter. It was Halloween, and that violated their religious beliefs. I don't understand why, nowadays, why don't we have the same accommodation? If a kid is a Muslim and he can't go to the Christmas party because they don't believe in Christmas, fine. The kid's a Jehovah's Witness, right? Fine. And why is there now this feeling that no, if the kid's family says we don't believe in homosexuality, that kid is required to sit there? Why? I'm actually working on a manuscript right now. It's something I'm working on. It probably won't be published for a long time because I got so much going on, right? And by the time I finally finish this book, it'll be a long time. But I'm always writing. I love writing, and I'm constantly writing political stuff. One of the things I'm working on is about, how to argue against wokeism. Kind of, it's like a book about arguing with wokeism, what wokeism is, etc. And one thing that I keep coming back to is when it comes to the LGBT stuff, right? How do I put this? Bullying is wrong. Bullying and discrimination is wrong. It is wrong to bully a kid because of the color of his hair. It is wrong to bully a kid because of the shape of his nose. It's wrong to bully the kid because of the tennis shoes that he or she wears. So bullying someone on the basis of the fact that they identify as gay or they present in a gender non-conforming manner is wrong. And what the woke people tried to do, and the basis of their deception, is they try to make everyone who disagrees with them into a bully. So it is very, very, very important that when you are arguing with people around these issues, you do absolutely everything you can to not appear as a bully. The issue is not your opinion about homosexuality. The issue is not your religion. The issue is, do you have just as much right with your family to practice your religion that maybe isn't okay with that kind of thing, or to practice your feminist beliefs that maybe don't? Do you have just as much rights as the LGBT people have? In America, we have the separation of church and state. Right? That is just how it is. We do not have a state religion in America. 9 of the 13 colonies had a state religion. And that's why in the First Amendment of the Constitution, the only way the American people would accept the U.S. Constitution was if it had a Bill of Rights. And the first amendment in the Bill of Rights, the very first line of it is, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or abridging free exercise thereof. That was the only way the American people would ever accept the Constitution, because Maryland was Catholic, Massachusetts was Puritan, Pennsylvania was Quaker, and the only way they could get all these different states that had different religions to be in the same country was there had to be a guarantee that we were never going to pick a favorite. We were never going to say, this is the religion the government believes in, and this one the government doesn't. And so based on that, our American schools can't be saying being gay is wrong because that's one person's religion, when somebody else's religion says, my interpretation of the Bible, whatever, says it's okay. However, and this is the other thing, you can't have American schools doing the opposite. You can't have American schools saying that people whose religion says that it might be wrong, which most religions historically and globally say you can't have the schools saying that those people are bad for their religious faith either. The government, all government institutions in America are supposed to be neutral on all religious matters. They are not supposed to be supporting Christianity, Islam, atheism, Judaism, Hinduism, none of it. And so because of that, if you want to argue against the woke thing on LGBT rights, the only ground you have is to say, I have my right to my religious beliefs with my family and my kids to say this is wrong, just as much as the LGBT kids and the LGBT parents have the right to their beliefs. That is the only basis on which you can argue the LGBT thing. If the conversation shifts away from there, it's a losing battle. You don't have any basis, right? The groomer thing, obviously pedophilia of any kind is not accepted, right? Whether it's straight or gay, no one can be molesting kids. They go to jail, right? But, at the end of the day, the basis on pushing back against the woke LGBT thing, the basis of it has to just be, just like you have the right to be you, I have the right to be me. And that is something that, unfortunately, a lot of people just can't wrap their heads around. People that are in the majority and are surrounded by people who agree with them often just forget that other people have the right to do and believe and practice and live according to their own conscience, even if it goes against the prevailing majority, right? And I grew up in a little town that was run by evangelical Christians, and all the time they were forcing evangelical Christianity onto us, and they were violating the separation of church and state. They had ministers come into the school, teachers were given religious rants in class. Well, that was a violation of my rights. I didn't agree with it. My family was pretty liberal. And that was a violation of my rights because the school is supposed to be neutral on those kind of things. Well, I say the same for conservatives now. If you're a conservative and you go to New York City public schools, you have the right to not have pro-LGBT speeches shoved down your kid's throat. You have the right to say if they're doing an LGBT pride parade and all the kids have to participate, you have the right to say, I'm taking my kid out of school, right? And that as long as we have the separation of church and state, you're on the list, as long as we have the separation of church and state in America, that's just how it has to be. And that's the only grounds on which you can argue, right? You have to argue. And this, by the way, this is the way the LGBT rights movement won. When they argued on these grounds, they won. People said, you know what? They said, you do your marriage your way, according to your conscience. We have the right to do our marriage our way, according to your conscience. And the Supreme Court looked at it and they said, you know what? You're right. In America, we don't have a state religion. The basis of opposing you doing your marriage this way is religion. So you're right. Well, and they were right. I think they were right. We don't have a religious government in America. So we have absolutely no grounds on which to tell anybody you can't have gay marriage or, you can't have gay marriage. You can't have polyamory or what do they call it? Polygamy, right? I mean, they were right. And that's how the gay people won the argument. They didn't make it about our way is the good way, your way is the bad way. No, they didn't make it about we're trying to convince you to change your beliefs. They made it about I got a right to be my way and we don't have a state religion in America. And that is how they won the argument. And now that things have shifted, that's the only grounds on which you have a way to argue against it. And you have to use that same argument that says, I have the right to be a Muslim. I have the right to be an Orthodox Jew. I have the right to be an evangelical. I have a right to be a Catholic. I have a right to be a Hindu and not go along with this, just like you have and had the right to do what you did when it was in the minority position. Right. And that's the only basis on which you can argue. And everyone hates bullies. Everyone hates bullies. Let me repeat this. Everyone hates bullies. If you're a bully, you're an asshole. And I know there's probably people watching this right now that are bullies. If you are a bully, you are an asshole, right? Everyone hates bullies. And it might make you feel good on the internet when you're surrounded by people who already kind of agree with you to kind of repeat nasty things about people and insult people, but that's not a winning argument, right? That might be fun for your little bubble on the internet to act like a bully, to use slurs, to insult people's appearances, to be nasty and hateful. That might get a lot of fun and attention and be entertaining to your little circle on the internet, but in real politics, it ain't an argument. It's not an argument. In real politics, that is set up for failure. If you ever look like a bully, you lose the argument. And that is what the woke people want to do. They want to frame it as every person who does not agree with everything, every aspect of this LGBT stuff, every single aspect of it is a bully. And that's how they win, because everyone hates bullies. Everyone who's ever been bullied or experienced bullying says that sucks. And so they frame the argument a certain way where they present every person who disagrees with what they say as being a bully. And that is how they win. Well, I'm sorry, but every female athlete who has a question about women's sports is not a bully. Doesn't mean they're necessarily right. Don't know enough about the issue. But I know a number of women who are feminists that have issues about women's rights that are not bullies, right? They're not beating anybody up. They're not shaming people for who they are. They're just saying, based on my knowledge of human anatomy and athletics, I don't think this is right. And they have the right to say it. And the same goes for, there are many, many people that say, based on their assessment of the medical stuff, that young children shouldn't be given puberty blockers. Are they bullies? Are they trying to make sure these kids get? No, they're actually concerned about these kids. They're not bullying these kids. They're saying that these puberty blockers are bad for them in the long term. Well, they're not bullies. They might be wrong. I am not a medical expert, and I have no interest in debating this because I'm not a scientist, but they're not bullies. And the only grounds on which you can argue against the woke, LGBT agenda. The only way you can argue against that is by arguing, number one, on the basis of I have the right to be and have my conservative beliefs, number one. And number two, making sure that you never sound or act like a bully, because you lose. You lose. The minute you sound like or act like a bully, you lose. Historically, this is true, right? Before gay marriage was legal, they used to say that Fred Phelps was the best friend the gay rights movement ever had. Did you know this? Because, Fred Phelps was this crazy pastor from Kansas who wore a cowboy hat and would picket the funerals of gay people, right? He would picket the funerals of gay people, and, and he had signs that said, God hates fags. And he was the best fundraiser the gay rights movement ever had. He was so hateful and nasty and mean-spirited. People would come to the fundraiser and he'd be outside with his cowboy hat on and his big signs. God hates you. You're going to hell. You ugly faggot. You're evil. And he'd be out there on a bullhorn with his big signs. People would go into the gay rights fundraiser. They'd open up their checkbooks and they would write checks like you wouldn't believe. He was the best friend the gay rights movement ever had because he looked like exactly every person who has any ounce of sympathy for the LGBT community would see that guy out there with his God hates fags and his cowboy hat and his on the bullhorn. You all are a bunch of disgusting animals. You're going to burn in hell. They would see him and people would just open their checkbooks, right? Because he sounded like a bully. He sounded like a person who committed hate crimes. He picketed funerals. For goodness sakes, he picketed funerals. Someone has just died. Their family is weeping. And instead of, saying, oh, I'm so sorry your relative died, he was out front with his bullhorn going. Right? Well, don't be that guy. If you want to argue against something that is being promoted in the name of LGBT rights, you don't want to be that guy. You don't. Right? You don't. And honestly, you don't really have much of an argument. Now, if you say you're against gay marriage, on what basis? On what basis? On what basis are you against gay marriage? Are you against gay marriage because it opposes your religious beliefs? Well, we don't have a state religion in America. So, you don't really have a basis, right? The only grounds on which you can object to anything LGBT is you just can argue that you have the right to be you and practice your beliefs with your family, with your kids, with your church, with your community, just as much as other people do. And that's the only thing you've got a basis for. Remember that, right? And I am sorry if there are people watching this that disagree with me, and if you move to another country, it's not the same, right? You move to another country where they do have a state religion, they have an Islamic government or a Christian government or a Hindu government. You're in another country where they do have, there is a legal basis for arguing something else, but other than that, that is my thoughts on that, right? Gabby, it's a long answer to your question, but it's important. And that, that people that use derogatory words, people that are out there acting like bullies, they are the best friends historically of people that are promoting the LGBT thing. And honestly, most of the LGBT stuff you can't really argue against. Gay marriage, right? People's right as adults to be transgender, you can't really argue against. The stuff people are concerned about at this point is stuff that is happening to people that are underage, stuff happening to people without the consent of their parents. Women have concerns about spaces that are reserved for women being violated by people that identify as women, but were not born with female anatomy. Those are different things, right? But if you're going to argue for those things, it has to be on a different basis. So that's all I can say. That is all I can say. So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Gabby. Noriega tried to organize a debt strike versus the IMF. I wasn't aware of that, but it doesn't surprise me. And again, this is what I'm talking about. All illiberalism is a threat to the liberal order. All illiberalism is a threat to the liberal order. All right. What's going on with Elon Musk? Are we witnessing the beginning of a Bonapartist struggle in Silicon Valley itself? Well, it looks to me like Elon Musk taking control of Twitter involved what they call a limited hangout, right? Everybody knew Twitter was rigged. Everybody knew Facebook was rigged. But Trump was out of office, and as part of kind of consolidating power, they needed to just kind of acknowledge social media is rigged. And Elon Musk needed to have Matt Taibbi go do his thing, and it was necessary for the FBI and for Silicon Valley to acknowledge what happened. And that's what I think that was about, because they never said they stopped. In fact, Elon Musk tweets in support of the FBI. They never said they stopped. They're still rigging social media. And Elon Musk is okay with them doing that, he said. But it's very clear that the way they rigged social media during the 2020 election was very, very, very partisan. Right? It was very, very partisan. No question about it. So, they had to acknowledge that. They had to just kind of get that out there. Now, are there differences among the ruling class? Absolutely. But at this point, I think Silicon Valley is pretty solidly in one camp. And that Elon Musk, he's a little bit more of a freewheeler, but he's not, I don't see him as thoroughly anti-establishment. I mean, he does things that makes the extreme liberals mad, but I don't see him as thoroughly anti-establishment. There are forces in the computer world, the tech world, that are thoroughly anti-establishment, but I don't think Elon Musk is one of them. All right. William Jennings Bryan, hero, wacko, views on him. Well, he was a populist, right? He was a populist. He fought against big business. However, he played a largely negative role, which is he brought the populist movement back into the Democratic Party, right? So the populist movement, the People's Party, originally, the original People's Party was the Republican Party. When Lincoln formed the Republican Party, it was a revolutionary party. It opposed slavery. It mobilized the free soilers, the small farmers, the labor unions, and others. It was a revolutionary party started to oppose slavery and to oppose the power of the slave owners and the power of Wall Street and London that were the financial backers of the slave owners. After the Civil War was over, the Republican Party divided into two, between the radical Republicans that wanted to continue the land redistribution, et cetera, and the mainline Republicans, right? And the USA was going into kind of an imperialist mode, right? So the small farmers, the free soilers, and the labor unions and some other forces broke with the Republican Party as it was becoming an imperialist party. And they formed the People's Party, or the populist movement, the People's Party. And originally, the populist movement was against racism, right? And no one ever talks about this, but originally, right? Originally, the Populist Party was against racism. Now, there's a very good book. I mean, I'm seeing it's online. It's online. It's called Southern Populism and Black Labor. It's written by Vince Copeland. It's a very, very good book. I wish someone would upload it, on the internet. There's probably a PDF by Vince Copeland, Southern Populism and Black Labor. And it's a very good pamphlet published by, the Workers' World Party during the 1970s, showing that originally the People's Party was against racism, and it saw racism as a tool of the wealthy plantation owners. And the free soilers were against racism. However, because the Republican Party was their enemy, because they were in the South, increasingly racism became part of the populist movement. It started to seep into the populist movement. And the Democrats were the party of Jim Crow segregation in the South. And everyone points out that they started building the Confederate monuments. They didn't build the Confederate monuments right after the Civil War. They built them in like 1900. And the reason for that was that the populist movement was going into the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party was playing up the idea that the Republican Party had betrayed the white people and they were the party of white people. And the Democrats, their main talking point in like 1900, 1910 was the Republican Party had given government jobs to black people, right? Oh, there's all these unemployed good white people out there and they gave your job to a black person. That was their argument that they would make. And they would argue that Abraham Lincoln had been cruel to the South with Reconstruction. And the Democratic Party was the party of racism. William Jennings Bryan is the man who took the populist party into the Democratic Party. So he played a negative role. And part of bringing the Populist Party into the Democratic Party was making the populist movement much more racist. And it was already happening. He didn't, he wasn't like singly responsible for doing that. And he took some good stances on issues like child labor, on issues like supporting labor unions. He was somewhat of a populist, but he embraced racism. And, at the infamous 1924 Democratic Convention, he opposed a resolution condemning the Ku Klux Klan. And he was for the Ku Klux Klan being part of the Democratic Party. So I would argue William Jennings Bryan played a negative role. I will point out, however, that the monkey trial, right, and that was the end of him. It was at 1926, 1927. When was the Scopes monkey trial? Right, the monkey trial. Right, the monkey trial was in 1925. That was when a teacher in Kentucky or Tennessee or someplace like that was arrested for teaching evolution, and they made a big case out of it. The John Scopes monkey trial. Well, William Jennings Bryan was arguing for, he was arguing against teaching Darwinian evolution. What's interesting, and this gets obscured, is that everyone knows about the monkey trial from a play. There was a play that was very popular, and it was about McCarthyism. It's called Gone with the Wind. It's a great play. I love it. I watched the movie many, many times when I was a kid. It's a great, great play. But Gone with the Wind is not about what actually happened at the Scopes monkey trial, right? The Scopes monkey trial, huge media event, 1925. Teacher's been arrested for teaching Darwin's evolution, and so they have a big trial with two famous lawyers, William Jennings Bryan and oh goodness, what's his name? William Jennings Bryan and oh goodness, his name is escaping me. The other one. Oh God, what is his name? He was the famous defense attorney who I cannot remember his name for the life of me. What was his name? The famous defense attorney. Whoa, goodness, why is his name? Clarence Darrow. William Jennings Bryan, the populist Democrat who, brought populism back into the Democratic Party and was racist, but also had fought big business. And and Clarence Darrow, who was the labor attorney. He'd been known as a labor union attorney, but he then became famous for defending people that were facing the death penalty and convincing juries not to execute people. Those were the two lawyers, and it was a media circus, 1925. Well, they made a movie about it called Inherit the Wind, and the movie Inherit the Wind has nothing to do with what actually happened. That movie is about McCarthyism. It's about a mob of ignorant right-wing people threatening an intellectual, right? That's not what it was about, right? First of all, the Scopes monkey trial, the teacher who taught evolution planned to get arrested. In fact, he was the football coach of this little town, and the town wanted publicity, and they wanted to create a media event, so they planned to have him get arrested. It was a planned thing. The guy was not a persecuted science teacher. He was the football coach of the town. He was very good looking, a very athletic guy, and they said, all right, we're going to have him get arrested for teaching evolution to make our town famous. So the whole thing was staged. That was one thing about it. And the arguments that William Jennings Bryan made against the teaching of evolution were largely populist arguments, right? And that gets totally obscured in the movie Gone with the Wind, or Inherit the Wind. I'm sorry. In the movie Inherit the Wind, they make it like he's just, oh, I love the Bible, and they make him like a Bible thumping, angry, hateful preacher. In reality, William Jennings Bryan was arguing that Darwinian evolution was the basis for social Darwinism, survival of the fittest, and that's what let big business do the evil things it did. He was arguing that World War I was a horrendous event that had traumatized people, and that his arguments were conservative arguments, but they were populist arguments. He was arguing that evolution says that there's no right and wrong, and that gets obscured because that doesn't fit. Right. The political discourse has changed so much since those years. Right. It has changed so much since that time that, the way everyone looks back on the Scopes monkey trial, they think it was about freedom of religion and freedom of consciousness against right-wing conservatives. It was actually more about, small town labor populism and New York City elitism. And what was interesting was that H.L. Mencken, who was a reporter for the Baltimore Sun, he reported from the Scopes Monkey trial, and his arguments were basically, he said all kinds of very, very classist, nasty things about all the people who lived in the little town, and basically arguing that all the small town people who believed in, the Bible and rejected evolution, they were a bunch of inferior rabble. They were proof of Darwinian evolution because they were closer to monkeys, and it was really nasty. Right? H.L. Mencken wrote some very, very nasty things, basically arguing that, the working class people who worked in coal mines and lived in small towns were inferior stock, and that there was an elitism that flowed through the writing of H.L. Mencken and others. And that the other thing that's interesting, and this is also interesting, right, is that Clarence Darrow, his claim to fame, and this is very interesting, was the Loeb and Leopold case. Do you know about the Loeb and Leopold case? Well, Clarence Darrow had been this populist attorney, was associated with labor unions. However, he took up there was a very weird case in Chicago in the 1920s where two Jewish teenagers, they were of Jewish descent, and they were teenagers, and they were gay. And they were being gay with each other. And one of them was a sociopath, and one of them was psychologically disabled. And the one who was the sociopath said they wanted to murder a mentally retarded young man because he said he wanted to know what it felt like to be a murderer, and they wanted to show that morality didn't apply to him. It was a really crazy case. So these two gay teenagers, one of whom is disabled and the other of whom is a sociopath and a murderer, they knew about a disabled, mentally retarded young man, and so they murdered him. And they did it because I guess the one guy said he wanted to know what it was like to be a murderer. It was just a really horrendous case, and they got caught. And of course, they're facing the death penalty, but their parents were both millionaires. And so they hired Clarence Darrow to be their attorney, and they were found guilty. But Clarence Darrow gave the argument about whether they should get the death penalty or not. And he spoke for like 4.5 hours, and he made the judge cry. And he basically argued that these young men had been taught Nietzsche at the university. They didn't know what right and wrong really was. Their community one of them had been molested when he was a young boy, and that, they were confused. They didn't know what right and wrong was. And, they were so young, and do they need to die at this young age? And the judge started crying, and they didn't get the death penalty. They got like really long sentences in prison. And many people look at that case and are like, wait, what in the world was going on there? Well, that was Clarence Darrow, right? That these two rich young guys, he got them off of the death penalty. Now, I'm against the death penalty, so I guess that's a good thing. But many people looked at that, and that the arguments that Clarence Darrow was making were kind of like, how do we really know what right and wrong is? Did these boys really get a chance to learn what right and wrong was? One of them got molested. They learned Nietzsche at their school. Their teacher taught them Nietzsche. And so they were just kind of following what their teacher had told them. And you read the speech he gave, it was this long, hours and hours ramble before the judge to convince the judge that, these boys didn't deserve the death penalty. And it worked, Now, of course, if these boys hadn't had a millionaire parents to hire that guy, they would have gotten the death penalty. But it was a weird case. And that case was then used by Clarence Darrow. He brought it up and he said, look, you said that right and wrong don't exist. That's Loeb and Leopold. That's an argument for why we have to teach the Bible in school. So it's complicated, right? All these things are interesting. The Scopes Monkey trial, if you read Labor's Untold Story, the main feeling of the communists and the leftists in America at the time, the labor movement, was it was a big distraction. right? Having an argument about whether or not we teach the Bible in school or we teach evolution was a big distraction from the fact that Sacco and Vanzetti were facing the death penalty. It was a culture war. It was a distraction from the fact there was a very serious case, labor case where there were two labor leaders who were framed up and eventually did get the death penalty. Right. And that culture wars and, having a big fight over evolution in a little town that the media covered nonstop was a way to distract from the class struggle. And, that was kind of how the communists felt. So I don't know. I mean, it's some interesting history. You asked Carter about William Jennings Bryan. I gave you a very long answer. That's the beauty of these streams, right? People ask me a short question and I give a long answer. And it's funny because Gabby's super chat here is kind of about the same thing. It's like if we have public schools allow Bibles. I think in English class, right, familiarity with the Bible is probably necessary in order to understand American literature, right? I mean, if you're going to read Shakespeare, you have to know who Adam and Eve were. You have to know the 10 Commandments, right? So the Bible does have a place in American education, just not in the science class, right? I think that's the argument, right? That science belongs in science class. The Bible can be studied as literature, right? And you can't understand English literature through the ages, right? You can't understand English literature throughout the ages if you don't understand the Bible, right? Now, if you're going to study Middle Eastern literature, you need to know the Quran. You cannot understand the Arab world if you don't understand Islam, right? And that religion is important to know about in order to understand culture, in order to understand world history. So I'm not against any religion being in schools. I'm against the schools being a platform for the preaching of one particular religion, because in America, we do have the separation of church and state. And that was a founding principle of the country. We decided when we wrote the U.S. Constitution, couldn't write it unless it had the First Amendment, the first sentence saying no state religion. And so that means that your public school has no business telling you what God's opinion is on anything. Your public school has no business telling you to be a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or an atheist or anything. That is the government's job, is to stay out of all religious matters and be neutral on all religious matters. That is the duty of the government. And in line with our Constitution. And, it was funny. I was talking with Jyoti Brar last time she was in town, and we talked about it. It was actually very interesting, right? We were talking to her about religion because, she's a communist. She's a classic ML, right? They're atheists. They don't believe in religion. But, we're talking to her, and, in UK society, religion is not a really big deal. It's not, right? But what's funny is in the United Kingdom, they have a state religion. The Church of England is the state religion. And the reason that works in Britain is because nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's a very secular society. People don't go to church. There's Catholic churches. There's the Church of England. There's Muslim mosques. There's synagogues. But most people just don't talk about religion. They don't care. And that's due to that fact. Having a state religion in Britain is not a big deal. If you tried to have a state religion in America, there would be war. Could you imagine what would happen in America if they tried to declare a Catholic government? There would be riots in the streets. Imagine what would happen in America if we tried to declare a Protestant government. There would be riots in the streets. Imagine if in America we tried to declare a Mormon government. If we tried to declare, a Jewish or a Muslim government in America, there would be riots in the streets because we care about religion. Americans are a very religious people. Religion is a built-in part of our culture here. America was largely founded by people who wanted to practice their religion in their particular way. So they got on a boat and came here so they could do it. Now, obviously, you have people that were brought here in chains as slaves. You also have people that were living in Mexico and they didn't cross the border crossed them. You have the indigenous people who didn't have their religious freedom until the 70s, which is ridiculous. There was just this big exception. Federal law outlawed the practice of Native American religion until the 70s, which is insanity, right? That's ridiculous, exception. There was this exception to religious freedom for Native Americans, right? That's ridiculous. Thank goodness they got rid of that. But to be fair, a large bulk of the U.S. population are people who came here for whatever reason, because they wanted to practice their religion in their unique, special way. And because that is such a big part of our history, we allow shit in America most countries wouldn't allow. Number one, Amish people, right? The Amish. I grew up, I saw Amish people, it'd be horse and buggy driving by my house. I lived in a little town in Ohio. Obviously, I was not Amish. I grew up, but I saw them. We certainly saw them. And I got to tell you, if you go to France, you go to Germany, you go to Britain, you go to most countries in the world, if you want to be Amish, fine, right? If you want to not have electricity, not have running water, fine. But if you have kids, no, those kids are getting taken away. Those kids are going to grow up with electricity. Those kids are going to grow up with running water. But in America, we say, you know what? If you want to raise your kids without running water, without electricity, go right ahead. This is America, the land of the free and the home of the brave. That is because of our unique history as a people. That would not happen in any other society. In any other society, they would consider it child abuse to raise a child Amish. But we don't. Snake handling is legal. There are 2 states in the United States where if your religious faith mandates that you have a ceremony in which you hold a poisonous snake and pray to God that it doesn't bite you as a way of testing your faith, you're allowed to do that. And they do this, and they have services where there are children, people under the age of 18, who sit and watch as adults hold poisonous snakes, and once or twice a year, one of them drops dead because the snake bites them. So, we allow that. They say, hey, if you want to have a snake handling service at your church and you're in Kentucky or Tennessee, go right ahead. This is America, the land of the free. You can handle poisonous snakes and you can have a church service where somebody drops dead. Well, this is America. Other countries, they would say no. Any public service, any public event involving poisonous snakes is not allowed. Well, here in America, it's about as close to human sacrifices as you can get, right? It's not exactly human sacrifices, but it is a religious ceremony in which people are, doing something that just might kill them. And it tends to kill 1 or 2 people every year. This is America. We allow this kind of thing. And I could go down the line. I could give many examples of this. But as a society, we tolerate things in the name of religion, because this is such a unique part of our heritage. And it's really interesting because America is a much more religious country than most Western countries. But that is why separation of church and state is so important. I strongly believe in the separation of church and state because I want to protect, I think the religiousness of our people is actually a very beautiful thing. And I didn't think that when I was a kid. When I was a kid, it annoyed me. I was sick of it. I felt persecuted because my family was more liberal and we were surrounded. But I'm at the point where I see how toxic the liberal order is. And I think that the religiousness of America is actually one of the things that gives me hope. The fact that many Americans have been brought up from the time they were children to believe that right and wrong does exist, to believe that there is truth in the world, to believe that fighting and sacrificing for what's right is the highest and best thing one could do. That gives me a lot of hope, honestly. But at the same time, I recognize the religiousness of America. The religiousness of America very much requires that we have the separation of church and state. We have to, because that's the only way this society would work. If we mandated a state religion, the religiousness of America would cause this country to fall apart. We can't have a state religion in America. So those are my thoughts. I've thought about this a lot, right? So I'm at the point where I actually have come to make peace with and embrace the religiousness of American society, but I still strongly believe in the separation of church and state because the religiousness of America, there you go. I'm repeating myself. So there we go. I hope this was an interesting stream, everybody. Glad you're here. Make sure you hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notifications bell. They are messing with me like something evil. And I just got to say, I'm not here to chase after clicks. I'm not here to chase after likes. Not here to do that. I am not here to do that. And just because the algorithms incentivize me to do something doesn't mean I'm going to do it. There are times where I have to say something, right? And I said what needed to be said. And that's it. And that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying more. And I'm not here to be anybody's monkey. I'm not here to dance for you, right? That's not what I'm here to do. I have a specific mission that I am here to carry out. I'm trying to build an anti-imperialist united front. That's what I'm here to do. I spoke about what I've needed to speak on, and if I feel a need to speak on that again, I will, but I don't feel that need right now. Not here to dance for you. I have a job to do. We've got to build an anti-imperialist united front. And in December, we are having an anti-imperialist mega rally in Portland, Oregon. And that's really, really important. And we need to do everything we can to build that event. We need to support the Uhuru movement right now. We need to oppose the march toward fascism and war. So there we go. All righty. On that note, I'm going to put on the closing music. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.